Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. The unlucky warrior did not want to confess, and Lin Li did not force him either. He just bent down and picked up the armor that was said to have issues amongst the mess of equipment on the floor. It was a common half-body armor made from refined iron. It was even plated with eternal adamantine in a few crucial spots. The craftsmanship was pretty decent. It was of an above-average standard even from Lin Li's point of view. The problem stated by the unlucky warrior was the chest area of the armor. When Lin Li picked it up, he immediately saw a long crack. This crack started from the shoulder and stretched all the way till the abdominal area. Just by looking, it seemed to be split by a sharp edge. "I'll ask one last time, who was it that asked you to come?" Lin Li could guess what was the issue just by looking at the armor in his hands. The warrior broke out in a cold sweat from fear, but his mouth was tightly shut. It was not because he did not want to say, but because he really did not dare to. The person that made him do this had very powerful backing. Now, he only wished that this young mage was making wild guesses. Maybe if he were to persevere for a while more, he would let him off. The warrior could only console himself in this way. The warrior shut his mouth tightly, but the thief at the side could not tolerate it anymore. "Honorable Mr. Mage, we admit that we are not your match. But, you also can't just willfully accuse us, right? The armor that was bought yesterday had already been split at night by somebody with a sword. You've seen that crack yourself. If it was not because my friend got lucky, he would have been already dead. Shouldn't Boss Buck compensate us for selling us such an armor?" "Well said, but you seem to have forgotten something." Lin Li only smiled when facing the thief's questioning. "While creating this crack, have you guys thought about how much strength is required to create such a long crack?" The thief's face suddenly froze. It was as if an invisible hand had shoved a cloth into his mouth. "Box novel coem." Lin Li smiled, and turned around to look at the warrior, praising him sincerely. "You must be Titan's descendant. You didn't get injured from such a powerful slash. You even have the energy to seek trouble with Buck the next morning. You must be from a circus. Also, could I trouble you guys to be more professional?" The two of them were baffled with the lesson taught to them. They stared at each other blankly. So unprofessional even when falsifying. Such a lack of professionalism. Lin Li shook his head as if he'd been expecting better. "Look at this opening yourselves. Does it look like it was caused by a sword? It's more like it was gnawed by a dog. Just look at it yourselves, there are even serrations." "Your swords can cause serrations?" The warrior and thief were full of confusion while listening to Lin Li lecture them old-fashionedly. Okay, Lin Li felt thirsty, after lecturing for so long. He only then passed the armor to a dumbfounded Boss Buck. He used a perilous look to glare at the thief and warrior. "I'll give you a chance. If you don't say it now, you won't have the chance to say it later." The warrior opened his mouth, and thought of continuing to deny it, but only spoke halfway before Lin Li glared at him. Instantaneously, he felt like there was something stuck in his throat, and his voice was terrifyingly hoarse. We can't say." "You're scared?" Lin Li glanced outside, and then advised the warrior softly, "Relax, there is a total of 4 people here. If none of us says anything, who would know what happened today? You just need to pretend as if nothing happened later, and walk out with swagger. Nobody would suspect anything. Furthermore, even if this incident spreads out, nobody would suspect you guys. I'll honestly tell you something. That gentleman behind you isn't just involved with you guys only. Just less than an hour ago, Buck just sent off another group of people." Lin Li's words were just casually spouted. The moment he came in, he saw that Buck's face was bruised, and faintly became aware that something was off. It was just that he did not think about things from this perspective. However, after the warrior and thief came in, how could Lin Li not figure it out? Such incidents were too common. Within Alana City, there were countless cruel businessmen using such methods to undermine competitors. However, it went overboard this time. Not only were 2 batches of people sent, Lin Li's star ink was also carelessly smashed. Thinking about that half of a beaker of star ink, Lin Li's chest started to feel tight. Under the influence of these circumstances, he started to look at those two in menacing manner. So, what is it going to be? Hurry and decide, I am running out of patience. If you really want to keep mum, I won't force you to speak either. It's just that when you came in just now, you smashed something of mine. You have to compensate for this loss. It doesn't cost much, just a bit more than 100,000 gold coins or so. I'll give you a discount, and round it down to 100,000 gold coins. You can leave whenever you pay me back, it's fine if you don't return me. Recently, I am lacking a few living humans to conduct magic experiments. The bodies of you two look pretty decent, I just might be able to use them. When the warrior heard this, he thought he was going to die. What kind of joke was this, demanding more than 100,000 gold coins instantly? As an adventurer, how could he have such a huge sum of money? The words of these young mage were not a joke. If he really conducted magical experiments on them, would it not be worse than death? He had heard of the cruelty of mages. Accordingly, some of these really psychopathic mages liked to dissect living humans and transplant all sorts of magical beast limbs on them, creating a monstrosity that was half human and half beast. Just the thought of it gave the warrior goosebumps. The warrior swallowed his saliva, and used a voice that was softer than a mosquito to spout out a few words with difficulty. Hammer of Glory. When this voice that was softer than a mosquito's was heard by Buck, his complexion changed immediately. Hammer of Glory? Yes. The warrior looked at Buck. Unknowingly, Lin Li suddenly felt that his gaze towards Buck had a trail of pity. Lin Li rubbed his eyes, and he was not mistaken. This guy that he had almost forced to commit suicide was now looking at Buck with full of pity. All of these was obviously caused by a place called Hammer of Glory. Instantly, Lin Li could not help but feel somewhat uncertain. What is Uriel Forging Workshop? It is also an equipment store, specializing in all sorts of armor. It is only 2 streets away from here. And then? And then, they have the backing of the Marathon family. The Marathon family, Lin Li rolled his eyes. Boss Buck's luck was chasing up to his. Just by selling 2 pieces of armor, he could also provoke the Marathon family. Thinking about the influence of the Marathon family, Lin Li could not help but worry about Boss Buck. Would there be any trouble? It is nothing big, they just belong to the Marathon family in name. However, in reality, they are under the management of a few businessmen that are not locals. Boss Buck shook his head, he seemed to be somewhat down. But, this time I would have to spend quite a bit of money. Lin Li nodded his head, and did not continue asking. He waved his hand in annoyance at those two. If there is nothing else, you can leave. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mage. They trembled in fear for a long time, before finally hearing Lin Li say those words. At that moment, they did not dare to hesitate. Instantly, they ran away, without leaving a trace. Sorry to trouble you, Mage Felix. It's nothing, Lin Li smiled, and did not say anything more. He could help Buck till this point, whereas for the future, Buck was definitely mentally prepared. There was no need for Lin Li to help him. After Lin Li went back into the room, he concocted some star ink again. He spent about half an hour on the ManhwaRecap for the 2 sets of armor. By the time he came out of the room, Boss Buck had just cleaned up the mess on the floor. Just as he was about to start a conversation with Buck, he saw Sean's silhouette appear at the corner of the street. This kid is finally back. Sean, here. Lin Li stood at the entrance, and shouted from afar, how was it, everything settled? Everything has been settled, Mr. Felix. That's good. This set of armor is for you, keep it safe. Get ready, and then we will leave. Lin Li nodded, and placed a set of armor in his hands. Then, he turned around and bid farewell to Boss Buck, whom he had inconvenienced this morning. Boss Buck, I really inconvenienced you, today. It's nothing. You're welcome to come again, Mage Felix. After they left the store, Lin Li went to rent a car from the car rental. On the way there, he also went to Azaleh's house, and delivered 10 pieces of eternal adamantine that he had promised him yesterday. After everything had been done, Lin Li drove the carriage and left Alana heading towards the Fire Plume Ridge. The distance between the Fire Plume Ridge and Alana was about half a day's journey. Setting off from Alana, they'd pass by Black Hills town and follow the outskirts of the Forest of Whispers heading southwards. If the carriage was fast enough, it would only take a maximum of 2 hours before they started to feel the temperatures of the Fire Plume Ridge. The location of Black Hills town was very advantageous. It was right next to the low-level adventurers' haven, the Forest of Whispers, and in close proximity of the Fire Plume Ridge, which was full of materials. The traveling adventurers and traders had given the inns overwhelming patronage. Within a radius of 100 miles, the Fire Plume Ridge should be the area that had the rarest materials in the highest abundance. It was only extreme environments such as the Fire Plume Ridge's one that could produce rare materials in high quantities. All sorts of rare herbs and ores, as well as magical beast hides, that were sold for high price, could be found here. Most of the adventurers that could explore here had some backing from their families. The Fire Plume Ridge did not only produce Black Lotus. In it, there were some rare materials that could even make Lin Li excited. For example, the infernal magic iron, the best material for creating fire attribute magical weapons, could be found deep in magma. This was not something common. Just any piece of infernal magic iron could be forged into a magical equipment that was incomparable in power. The magical strength contained within was at least at the level of a magic shooter. The magical gemstones were also of top quality. Just any one of them would be stronger than Anduin's Crystal of Eternity. If they were lucky, they could even find the flame's heart. That was the purest essence of fire, whether it was for forging or for magical enchantments, it was the best of the best. With just a bit of the flame's heart, one could bestow equipment with powerful fire abilities. With the rarity of the infernal magic iron, Lin Li could not help but be excited. When he was in the Endless World, he could be said to be the richest person. He had several private mineral veins, but he drooled over the infernal magic iron. The requirements for mining such a rare magical metal were too difficult. An average person would not even have the chance to discover it, so how could they have the ability to mine it? However, the things that could not be done in the Endless World had a chance of succeeding in Amril. Before leaving for the Fire Plume Ridge, Lin Li specially went to the Omniscient Tower to find information related to it. Who knew that with this search, he found traces of a clue. It was the diary of an archmage. According to the memories of this archmage from 300 years ago, he followed a team of adventurers to the peak of the Fire Plume Ridge when he was younger, and challenged a level 16 or devouring beast. Frankly, from Lin Li's view, there was nothing much about the fight. The archmage only had the strength of level 12 at that time. When facing the level 16 magical beast, he'd only showed his face before rocks rolling down from the summit broke his leg. The whole battle had nothing to do with him, and he relied on his powerful teammates to survive. However, within these few phrases, Lin Li found 2 interesting points. According to the memories of the archmage, the ore-devouring beast's body would be covered in magma when it appeared. Just a slight shake would fill the sky with a rain of fire. This was an important point. A creature like the ore-devouring beast did not require severe living conditions. It could walk in the searing heat, or rest in a cool cave. The only important condition was that their living environment required rare mineral veins. The stronger the elemental strength contained within these mineral veins, the stronger the ore-devouring beast. The body full of magma also meant that the ore-devouring beast lived within the magma. Furthermore, the memories of that archmage also hinted that the ore-devouring beast had also summoned a meteor shower. This was an equally important point. The strength of ore-devouring beast came from the rare ores that it devoured. If it consumed ice crystal metal, it would have magical elements of the ice attribute in its body. The spells that it used would also be something like crystal nova. Since it unleashed meteor shower, the rare mineral veins that it devoured would naturally contain magical elements of the fire attribute. An ore-devouring beast that lived in the magma and devoured a rare fire-attributed mineral vein. All of the signs hinted that the Fire Plume Ridge had a high possibility of containing an infernal magic iron mineral vein. When the carriage entered Black Hills town, it was close to dusk. Lin Li looked at the sky and decided to stay at the town for a night first. The Fire Plume Ridge was unlike the Forest of Whispers. There was no knowing what trouble might arise if they headed over at night. 2 rooms. Lin Li stopped the carriage and brought Sean into an inn that was rather clean. When he asked for the rooms, he even emphasized it once more. It must be 2 rooms. The experience at Black Hills town previously had terrified him. In Lin Li's mind, Sean's snoring had already surpassed the realm of noise. It was a torture that could not be tolerated by humans. Lin Li could even bet that if a dragon were to share a room with Sean, it would also not be able to tolerate the torturous sound. Luckily, this inn's business was not as good as the previous ones. Lin Li managed to get 2 rooms without a problem. Oh, yes. Please bring us some food later, Lin Li instructed a maid before entering the room. Yes, Mr. Mage. Lin Li remembered something when the maid addressed him as Mr. Mage. It seemed that the leather armor that was painstakingly made had not been worn yet. After returning to the room, Lin Li opened up the Ring of Endless Storm and retrieved the leather armor that he had crafted in the day. Speaking of which, this was the first time that Lin Li had worn something else other than robes ever since he had came to Amril. When he transmigrated, he was already wearing the Robe of Wrath, and had already been wearing it for almost half a year. From the Sunset Mountains to Gerosis, and from Gerosis to Alana, all the way till some time ago, when he changed into the Robe of the Void. Lin Li, who'd got used to wearing robes, felt somewhat uncomfortable after wearing the leather armor. You're Mr. Felek? Sean had a shock when he was having dinner. Duh, Lin Li wanted to smash a plate on this fella's head. He merely changed clothes, was there a need to exaggerate it? This time, he might have misunderstood Sean. Lin Li was clad in a suit of tight-fitting red leather armor, with sharp daggers on his leather boots, a crossbow on his back, and a quiver at his waist. There were 2 vampiric fang bolts amongst them. By walking around with this image, who would have imagined that this guy was a mage that wore a robe and carried a magic staff if he did not say it himself? After being tossed around for half a day in the carriage, Lin Li felt exhausted. He dismissed Sean to the room after having dinner. He closed his door, and prepared to have a good sleep to rejuvenate himself so that he could take a good look at the Fire Plume Ridge to see if there were really that many rare materials for him to gather. Just when he had laid his head on the pillow, there was clear PAK coming from downstairs. Fuck, when Lin Li heard this sound, he immediately felt like smashing his head against the wall. The last time when he was at Black Hills town, it was also a slap that made him not have a good sleep. He really felt like blasting a fireball through the floor and asking those fellas, "Are you fucking gonna let me sleep? It's the middle of the night, are you gonna let me sleep?" Lin Li opened the window in a depressed manner, and saw that there were a few carriages that stopped outside the front of the inn. A group of fellas wielding their weapons came down from the carriages one after another. There were more than 10 people in this group, and they looked threatening and malicious. Even if Lin Li was blind, he knew that they were not here to stay at the inn. What made Lin Li feel odd was that these people were not bandits, though they were also looking malicious and using weapons. Lin Li could distinguish who was a bandit and who was an adventurer. The leather armor on these people were inscribed with a pair of interlocking swords as their logo. This should be the logo of a certain group of mercenary corps. It was like Silver Hand that had a sword and the Ruby Moon Mercenary Corps that used a red crescent. As for which group this was, Lin Li had no clue yet. And the last person that came down from the carriage was even a mage. Lin Li was shocked. A mercenary corps that had mages was uncommon. Within Alana City, the prowess of a mercenary corps was usually determined by the number of mages they had. Why was Elijah doing well? It was because he had a team of more than 10 mages that had powerful magic strength under him. Some of them were even archmages. Elijah relied on this strength to barge his way through into the top 10 mercenary corps in Alana. At this time, Lin Li had no choice but to admit that this was not a weak mercenary corps. The boss of this inn was really unlucky. He was slapped till he could not even differentiate his directions. Half of his face was swollen. It was like a bun was shoved into his face. When he spoke, it was as if there was air leaking out. You. What do you want? It's none of your business, scram. The one that struck him was a young bandit that looked fierce and tough. Before the inn's boss could finish speaking, he was kicked and sprawled on the floor. Brothers. The bandit kicked the boss and turned back, pointing at an inn. Whoever catches that woman, I will let him have some fun first. Okay. The bandit's words of incitement were like throwing a piece of meat in the middle of a pack of wolves. The group of adventurers' eyes immediately turned red, and they rushed into the inn growling and snarling, fearing to be the last. Box Novel Coem. The trampling footsteps came from the bottom. Lin Li released Warlock's eyes and sent them to watch the events in the corridor. At the same time, his gaze was set upon the mage that was at the entrance of the inn. The mage was in his 40s. His face was so pale that it did not have the color of blood. It looked like he was a zombie that had just crawled out from the graveyard. His body was emitting an evil yet cold aura. This feeling naturally made Lin Li remember the undead creatures at the Shadow Glen. But, most importantly, based on what Lin Li saw, the mage was at least level 14. He was at the border of entering the realm of archmages. Lin Li thought for a long while, but he could not recall which mercenary corps in Alana City had the strength to recruit a person that was so close to the level of an archmage. Just when Lin Li was pondering, a group of adventurers had rushed to the second floor. From the Warlock's Eye's vision, Lin Li could clearly see that there were a total of 19 adventurers. There were 10 warriors, 6 thieves, and 3 archers. If the mage that was downstairs was included, it would be exactly 20 people. The thief that struck was the leader of this group of people. He was holding a dagger in each of his hands, and when he came upstairs, his whole body gave off a murderous aura. Bam! When the thief came up to the second floor, he immediately kicked open the door that was next to stairs. What you are doing? A traitor was staying inside that room. When the thief kicked the door, there was a scream coming from the room. Shut up. If you want to live, then continue sleeping. After threatening the traitor fiercely, the thief then signaled to his underlings. Continue searching, you must find that woman. Yes. With the command from thief, a group of adventurers became even more outrageous, kicking the doors. They did not care what the other party was doing, they just unsheathed their weapons and chased those people out. Seems like I won't get to sleep tonight, Lin Li sighed. He looked rather annoyed. By judging the situation, it was a matter of time before it was his turn. As he had expected, a big mustached man kicked open his door in the next moment. This big mustached man was tall and buff. He held an axe in each of his hands. His tanned face was filled with killing intent. He looked as though he was fiercer than Sean, the human magical beast. The big mustached man raised both axes when he just came in. Get out. Oh. Lin Li did not resist. Since he'd already been woken up by them, he might as well take a look at what was going on. As he followed the man with a big mustache out of the room, he saw that most of the guests of the inn had already been chased out. The majority of them were still thin pajamas. With the addition of fear, all of their faces were as pale as a sheet of paper. They were trembling in the corridor as though they had malaria. The inn was in a mess. A group of malicious adventurers were chasing people out of their rooms. That violent manner made it seem like they were not chasing humans, but draft animals. There was some resistance, which was met with beatings. Within a few seconds, some of the people had already been hurt. The thief stood at the corridor and silently stared at the crowd. Mr. Fellick, Sean, was also chased out. Even though he had the power of a level 10 warrior, he would not make a move without Lin Li's orders. He was being escorted by 2 archers, walking out of the room. His voice carried a hint of request for instructions. No rush, we'll see how it is first. Lin Li smiled. It was as though he did not pay attention to those adventurers beside him. In fact, he had no need to pay attention to them. Among the people that came today, excluding that weird mage, most of them had the strength of around level 10, including that thief. They might not be able to beat Sean, much less if Lin Li were take action. Shut up. Just when the two of them had spoken a few words, a warrior that was at the side recklessly shoved Lin Li. If this scene was to be seen by Mason, he would be so terrified that he would have cold sweat. Anyway, Lin Li's feelings were those of curiosity. He actually did not lose his temper after being shoved by the warrior, which was rare. He just conscientiously embraced his head and stood at the side with Sean. Captain, we only found these few. This carpet-sweeping method of searching came to an end quickly. The voices came from one of the rooms. Lin Li curiously raised his head and looked over. He saw a group of people being dragged, and one of them looked familiar. With just a glance, Lin Li had shot. Within the group of people that was dragged out, there actually was Hank's silhouette. Release me, you bunch of morons. After hearing this indistinct voice, Lin Li knew that he did not recognize the wrong person. It really was Hank. Why was this person speaking indistinctly? This was because some of his teeth were knocked out by a few bandits when he'd stayed Black Hills town the last time. Lin Li was astonished for a moment. Even though Hank's strength was nothing much, he was still a member of the Silver Hand. Within Alana, Silver Hand was a mercenary corps that was at least in the top 3. Everyone was of the same profession, so how could this bandit not know it, and how could he be so daring to actually lay his hands on someone from the Silver Hand? From the looks of it, it seemed like he did not only want to lay his hands on Hank. Just now, wasn't this guy shouting that he wanted to catch a woman? Wait, a woman? This sudden thought gave Lin Li a shock. The woman that the fella mentioned, could it be Ina? Before Lin Li could ponder more, the bandit had a gloomy look, and asked, just these few? Just when the thief had finished his sentence, another adventurer came out from room beside. Captain, this room is empty. I fear the woman has already. Understood, the thief nodded, and walked to Hank with a gloomy face. Let me ask you, where is that woman? Hank coolly laughed. Road, do you think you can hide that tiny bit of shrewdness of yours from Captain Serena? Wipe your *s and wait, the end of your Rising Sun Mercenary Corps is coming. When did Serena escape? The thief's face was as black as the base of a pot. He did not imagine that this surefire operation would go wrong at the most crucial part. Serena escaped. What was the point of catching these small fishes? Heh, Hank had a proud look, and he pointed at the two thieves at the entrance of staircase. It was when these two idiots were only watching us. When Hank's voice just fell, the two thieves' faces were immediately as white as a sheet. They messed up in such a crucial situation, so the only fate that awaited them could only be trash. I will deal you with later. Rhodes stared at those two thieves menacingly, and then ordered his underlings. Bring them away. Yes. The thieves' voice had just befallen them when a group of fierce and aggressive adventurers rushed over. Hey, Hank, how could it be so coincidental? At this point, it was improper for Lin Li to continue watching the events unfold. In any case, Hank had helped him before. If it was not because he had provided information, Lin Li would be clueless about the trouble that Ina had run into. Fell. Mr. Fellick? Hank's eyes were instantly wide open. He could not imagine that he would run into this young mage again at Black Hills town. Although he was surprised, his suspended heart finally descended into place at the same time. He was clear that if this young mage were here, his life would be safe. Guys, how about some negotiations? Lin Li looked at the thief that was called Road, and smiled politely. Anyhow, capturing Mr. Hank is useless. Why don't we strike a deal? The thief was stupefied initially, and stared at Lin Li for a while before murmuring, what kind of deal? Lin Li scratched his head, and thought about it agonizingly before probing, why not just using your lives? The deal you speak of, is to exchange us for them? The thief had a bizarre expression, it was as though his mouth was filled with frogs. This suggestion was too amusing. He could not imagine that this guy that appeared to be normal had brought forth a suggestion that only a lunatic would suggest. Yes, think about it. This deal is really worthwhile. Lin Li nodded his head seriously, his facial expression was very earnest. With this sentence, it was not just the members of the Rising Sun Mercenary Corps, even the guests that had been chased out of their rooms looked at Lin Li in a queer manner. Nobody thought that this young man would say it so naturally. It was as though he was asking if the radish were to be sold for 5 copper coins per kilogram. Fuck, I met a lunatic. The thief stared at Lin Li for a while before coming to a conclusion. At that moment, he felt angry and amused. After all, he was part of important personnel of one of the top 3 mercenary corps in Alana. He felt unlucky as he even had to seriously discuss with a lunatic for such a long time. Take them. The thief had no interest in discussing with him anymore. After he gave out the orders to the underlings, he turned and started walking downstairs. Box novel Coem, you really don't want to think about it? Lin Li did not give up, and shot another question towards the back of thief. Think your fucking ass, the thief spewed vulgarities. He was about to be driven mad by this lunatic. The thief felt that if this were to continue, he might become a lunatic as well. Why, Lin Li shook his head, and some mana started to undulate. It was at this moment when there was the sound of heavy footsteps coming from the outside of the inn. At the moment when this sound descended, even Lin Li's facial expression changed. The sound of these footsteps was heavy. It sounded uniform. Lin Li knew that this was an elite force that was equipped with armor. If not, such a sound would not be produced. The Felon Kingdom's production of ores was not abundant. It was usually the army that could be equipped with armor made from refined iron. Normally, a mercenary corps could only put together a team of armored warriors with difficulty no matter how rich it was. From the sounds of footsteps, it seems like it was a contingent of more than 100 people. With so many armored warriors, could it be that Imperial Guards have arrived? Good evening, idiots of the rising sun. Just when Lin Li was feeling incessantly puzzled, there was the voice of a woman traveling from the skies. This voice was crisp and sweet. When it fell on the ears of the members of the Rising Sun Mercenary Corps, their complexions immediately changed. It was as though this was not a greeting, but a magic spell full of killing intent. As for those from Silver Hand, their faces had even weirder expressions almost similar to that of Rhodes. They had expressions that seemed like they wanted to smile, yet they did not dare to. Serena, shut up. This voice came from the skies, and Rhodes screamed like a cat that had its tail stepped on. His calm expression had immediately become distorted. Idiot, save some strength. No matter how you stomp, you are going to die today. Really? If stomping had any use, why would we need assassins? After Serena sentenced Rhodes to death in 2 sentences, it was as though she murmured the rest to herself. Rhodes was very close to losing his sanity. Unfortunately, he could not do anything to Serena. The whole Alana knew that this damned woman was a Sky Knight. She had a level 15 griffin as a mount. Nowadays, she mostly rode that damned griffin, circling around the top of people's head in a commanding manner. Rhodes got more depressed the more he thought about. It was as if he was so angry that he was about to vomit blood. It was not easy to seize this chance where the damned woman did not bring her griffin along, yet 2 idiots wrecked the whole situation. Now, not only did she bring the griffin, she even brought along the armored soldiers from Silverstorm. The victory that was supposed to be in hand had now been turned over. He could be torn into pieces by Silverstorm at any given time, not to mention allowing this damned woman flaunt her prowess above him. The footsteps outside the inn got heavier. It seems like the armored warriors were about to reach the entrance of the inn. Rhodes thought he was going to die when he heard heavy footsteps. That was Silverstorm, the strongest 100-man squad amongst the mercenary corps in Felon. Accordingly, the members of Sky Knights were retired soldiers from the Sky Knights Corps. The weakest amongst them had the strength of at least level 7. One of the main captains was said to have reached level 15 and above. The combat power of Silver Storm was almost comparable to that of the Felon Imperial Army. It was said that when Silver Storm had just been set up, they relied on the strength of these 100 members of Silver Storm to slay a level 18 magical beast in the Nightmare Mountains before establishing their position in one fell swoop as one of the top 3 mercenary corps in Felon. With such a monstrous strength, which mercenary corps in Felon would not be envious of them? Idiots of the Rising Sun, I'll give you 2 choices. 1. Jump out of the window yourselves. 2. Wait for someone to throw you out. Think carefully, you don't have much time left. It could because the inn was too quiet, but the captain that was circling in the air on his griffin started to agitate Road with words. Fuck, this crazy woman. If I catch you, I will definitely sell you to a brothel. Road harshly scolded. Captain Road, what do we do? With the most elite mercenary corps in Felon in close proximity, the more cowardly mercenaries from Rising Sun started to panic. They would be able to bully unarmed traders, and if they had bigger numbers, they could also bully low-ranked mercenaries like Hank. However, if they were to face Silver Storm, they did not even have the courage to resist. What's there to panic about? Road fiercely glared at them. It was these 2 fellas that were unable to accomplish anything. It was something that should have succeeded in, but they messed it up. Now, they even dared to speak so much. Do you think I do not know that we are in deep water? If it was not because of the impending troubles, Road wanted to kick them both to members of the Silver Hand first to let them vent their anger. Unfortunately, not only was Road unable to kick them out, he even had to calm them down. Under such circumstances, an additional member was another bit of strength. Road was clear on this principle. Don't panic, we have hostages. I don't believe that Serena will dare to come in strong. If she were to let Silver Storm charge in, we will kill of these fellas. Let's see how she can keep a foothold as a mercenary. Road's solution that he hastily came up with did indeed made some sense. They had 4 or 5 members of Silver Hand under their control. Furthermore, there were 2 that seemed like their positions were not low. If Serena were to come in strong, then at most he would just destroy them all and see how Serena could still establish herself as a mercenary. Such things were a great taboo. The profession of a mercenary was already very dangerous, and nobody knew when they would lose their lives. So why join a mercenary corps? It was because people wanted to live longer. If a mercenary corps captain were to betray his own members, who would be willing to follow him? It was a pity that Road forgot about something. Inside here, not only were there a few members of Silver Hand, there was a fella that seemed like a lunatic. Of course, he had yet to know the origins of this fella. But, Hank knew. As for how powerful this person was, Hank had seen it twice, once at a Black Hills town inn, and the other time at the Thousand Leaves bar, so he was not worried at all. He believed that if this young mage were here, his own life would be safe. The trust that Hank had in Lin Li was at level of being blind. He even had the leisure to chat with Lin Li, who was beside him, while facing Road, who would become reckless in desperation at any given time. Mr. Fellick, why do you have the time to come to Black Hills town? I planned to go to the Fire Plume Ridge. I did not think that I would be involved in this. Lin Li had no choice but to smile. He started to question his morals as he had run into the same type of encounter twice at Black Hills town. You want to go to the Fire Plume Ridge? Hank was surprised when he heard it, and then he hurriedly asked, Are you going tomorrow? Yes, what's up? That's great. Mr. Fellick, we are heading to the Fire Plume Ridge as well. Are you interested in going together? The previous time at Black Hills town, Hank wanted to pull Lin Li into Silver Hand. This fella refused to give up, and started to prod Lin Li in a roundabout way. Lin Li hesitated for a moment. Lin Li was very clear on what Hank was thinking about. Frankly speaking, he was rather tempted by this suggestion. A place like the Fire Plume Ridge was going to be more dangerous as they ventured further in. At any time, a level 15 and above magical beast could appear. If he could rely on a power like the Silver Hand, it would be much easier getting around. The problem was, relying was one thing, but if he were to owe them a favor, it would be hard to return it. Just when Lin Li was hesitating, Road had already rushed up to the top of the roof, and screamed at the top of his lungs, "Serena, don't forget that I still have your silver hand members in my hands. Do you still want them to live?" "Nonsense. How can the people of the Silver Hand be caught trashes like you? Trust you? Do you think I am as idiotic as you? Okay. Just wait, I'll prove it to you now." Seeing that Serena did not believe it, Road started to feel flustered. He pointed at Hank. "You, come over here. Speak to your captain. Don't disturb me, I'm busy." Hank was busy recruiting someone, so why would he even bother about other things? Road was screaming, yet he did not even turn around. Fuck, Road was so angry that his lungs almost exploded. Forget about the woman swaggering around on a griffin above him. Now, even a low-ranked mercenary did not even care about him. Was there any more justice in this world? Just when Road was raging till he trembled, Lin Li realized something unusual. Those footsteps were too far just now, and he did not take notice. But as time passed by, Lin Li started to feel something was wrong. There were many people in the corridor, but besides Lin Li, others were either shivering with fear or cold. The only one who was not shivering, Hank, was busy poaching Lin Li from Jerosa's Guild of Magic. So, out of the many people present, only Lin Li was aware of the anomaly. Those heavy footsteps sounded really abnormal, they were too precise, as if measured with a ruler. The rhythm of each step was exactly the same, and there was no murmur in the midst. Accuracy was not a problem, but it seemed fake if it was this accurate. Even if the Silver Storm was well trained, it could never be so precise. It was even neater than the best guard of honor. As the heavy footsteps approached, Lin Li gradually understood. He was absorbed in thoughts as he looked up at the ceiling. The female captain of the Silver Hand was very interesting. "Serena, you'd better not mess around." Road finally panicked as he saw the Silver Storm about to charge into the inn. The night's encounter was completely out of his control. He had yet to figure out what had gone wrong. It was well planned at the beginning, so why was the execution full of loopholes? Not only did Serena escape, but also brought the Silver Storm. At this point, Road was afraid to think about what would happen. At present, he was just trying to figure out a way to get out of here. Otherwise, it wouldn't be any fun if he fell into the hands of that woman. These few people from the Silver Hand were the only chips he had to get away. Unfortunately, these people were not willing to cooperate, especially the fellow who was still chatting away. The more Road thought about it, the angrier he felt. Did the damned fellow have the consciousness of being a prisoner? He thought he was going to the vegetable market. The knife was on his neck, yet he still had time to engage in small chit-chat with others. If the darned woman hadn't pushed too hard, he would have knocked off a few of his teeth again. Fuck, you're kidding me, aren't you? As he listened to the approaching heavy footsteps, Road could not wait any longer. He pulled out the dagger in his boots with one hand, and grabbed Hank's collar with the other, glaring fiercely at Hank. "There's nothing here of your business now. Get out of here." Hank was startled. This guy really hadn't died before? But to Hank's surprise, Lin Li didn't have any intention to make a move at all. He merely touched his nose, and stepped aside as he was told, for he knew he didn't need to make a move anymore. Through the vision of the warlock's eyes, Lin Li could clearly see several dark shadows sneaking into several open rooms. Swoosh! 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 The shadows in the room moved just as Road grabbed Hank's collar with one hand. In an instant, a sharp crack tore through the air, a wisp of cold light flashed across the corridor, and then he saw a spatter of blood. The clean corridor was filled with hot, gushing blood in a flash. Screams rose up, and the quiet corridor fell into a terrible mess at once. Confronted with an enemy of unknown origins, the men from the Rising Sun Mercenary Corps were scared out of their wits as they desperately tried to hide themselves in the corners. However, where was there any corner along this corridor? Those arrows were like poisonous snakes hidden in the dark. Wherever they ran with their heads in their arms, they'd end up spattering blood even if they stopped for only a little while. In a mere moment's time, a large group of men from the Rising Sun Mercenary Corps were shot down. As this one-sided massacre fell into the eyes of Lin Li, he knew at once that it was over for the Rising Sun Mercenary Corporation. In fact, they were not without opportunities. All the dozen of mercenary corps present had decent strength, the weakest of them were at least of level 9, and the strongest were above level 12. Even if Lin Li had personally made the move, it wouldn't be easy for him with such a force. Moreover, at the entrance of the inn stood a figure close to the rank of an archmage. As long as he could find a way to get the message out, the situation of battle in this corridor would be reversed immediately. Unfortunately, all of them had been thoroughly scared out of their wits. The famous Silver Storm in Alana was keeping watch, and there was a level 15 griffin hovering in the sky. In this critical time, they were met with archers stealthily attacking from the dark. Right now, they hated their parents for not giving them 2 extra legs to run faster, so how could they still have the leisure to judge how many enemies were hiding and ambushing them from the rooms? In the face of this sudden attack, the only one who could see the situation clearly was probably Road, but what role could he play alone? All his men were running around in panic, leaving Road yelling at the top of his lungs desperately, "There are not many of them, don't panic." Regrettably, nobody paid any attention to him. Everyone was running desperately, some to the rooms, some upstairs. Wherever they could hide, that would be where they ran. They were using all their strength to run, and then they were shot by the arrows that came from the darkness. Shit. Looking at this chaotic scene, Road knew that it was game over for him. In just a few minutes, these fools, who only knew how to run with their hands on their heads, would be killed by the archers in the dark. Road was utterly indignant as he listened to the shrill sound of the arrows tearing through the air. He was perhaps the only one among the crowd who had a grasp of the situation. There were not many archers hiding in the rooms. If these idiots could listen to him, how would they end up in such a state? It was a pity. No matter how unresigned Road was, there was nothing he could do about the other party. Things had developed to such a point, even if he could once again regain control of this group of frightened men, it was also impossible to bring them out of the inn. The only thing Road could do was to retreat toward a window step by step. This was the only way out for him. What he could do now was to take advantage of the opportunity when his men were delaying the enemies and jump from this window. As for whether he could escape the pursuit of the Silver Storm after jumping down, it would be entirely up to fate. It was a complete chaos in the corridor. The men of the Rising Sun Mercenary Corps were fleeing with their heads in their arms, and a group of residents were trembling in fear. Nobody had time to look around, and nobody cared about what Road wanted to do by going near the window. The only one who discovered he wanted to run was probably Lin Li, but Lin Li was not the least bit interested in him now. After all, it had nothing to do with Lin Li at all. Disputes between the mercenary corps happened countless of times every day in Alana. Lin Li had long gotten used to such things. They could fight among themselves, and he would continue his sleep. If it weren't for Hank, he would have already been back in his room, sleeping. Besides, Road planned to run? Could he even run? Lin Li knew very well what Road wanted to do. He even knew that if Road did jump down, it would never be the Silver Storm that was waiting for him. Sadly, Road didn't know anything. He was stepping back to the window, carrying the last bit of hope with him. Ah! And then, it was a shrill cry. Road had just retreated to the window, and before he could turn around, he suddenly felt a chill on his back, followed by sharp pain and a gush of blood pouring from his throat. "You lied to me," Road struggled to spit out the last sentence, then staggered and fell head first to the ground. A graceful figure jumped into the corridor from the window, wiping the blood on the sword while muttering innocently to herself, "How do I know you're so stupid?" Lin Li looked to the window, and saw a tall and beautiful woman standing there, slowly wiping a sword. After wiping the blood from the sword, the beautiful woman reached out her hands and pulled back her flying blonde hair. This feminine movement slightly diluted some of the horror brought about by the previous bloodshed and murder. After casually tying up her blonde hair, the beautiful woman turned back and frowned at Hank and the gang. "What are you guys doing, still spacing out here? Aren't you coming over to help?" "Captain, you're here at last," Hank smiled obsequiously. You could just let the silver storm in and settle those few clownfish at once. Why did you make us take the trouble? Hearing this, the beautiful captain's hand halted suddenly. After staring at Hank for a long while, she said abruptly, "Hank, tell me honestly. Was the man who wanted to escape through the window your brother?" Hank was bewildered by the question. "Otherwise, how could you be as foolish as him?" The beautiful captain turned the sword around and gave Hank a hard knock on the head. "Do you think I can fly? Do you think I can fly back to Alana and then back here with the silver storm in an hour?" Hank was so frightened by her that he even forgot the pain on his head. He froze there for a while before he finally opened his mouth and asked, Then, how many people did you bring? Where can I find anyone when all the people are at the Fire Plume Ridge? I met Aragon's team on the way just now, so I called them here." Hank almost lost his mind. A team of Silver Hand had always been composed of 8 people, that was to say, the beautiful captain had created such a huge array, but had in fact brought with her only 8 people. Lin Li leaned on the door, sizing up the beautiful captain with interest. The beautiful captain of the Silver Hand was a well-known figure in Alana. Lin Li had heard of Serena's name so many times that he had lost count. When he first saw her in real life today, Lin Li had to admit that this tall and beautiful woman really deserved her reputation. The raid tonight was too stunning. As the beautiful captain engaged in a question-and-answer session with Hank, the whole process of the raid became clear in Lin Li's mind. The awaiting Silver Storm and the hovering level 15 Griffin were all smokescreen arranged by Serena. In her own words, the Black Hills town was hundreds of miles away from Alana, and she couldn't really fly, so how would she be able to return so fast with the Silver Storm? Although Lin Li did not know what method she had used, one thing was certain: the heavy footsteps earlier on were absolutely an illusion that she had created in some way. There was no Silver Storm, nor a level 15 Griffin, at all. From the beginning, it was a play scripted and performed by the beautiful captain herself. The chips she had in her hands were at best those archers. This woman was really brave. She had the guts to charge into the inn to rescue others, with only 8 archers. The men from the Rising Sun Mercenary Corps could be said to be well-equipped and well-trained, including Rode, who was level 12, and a group of level 9 men, plus a figure close to the level of an archmage eyeing them outside the inn. If there was a slight mistake in this process, the whole troop would be wiped out in an instant. But that was what she did, and it was very successful. The Rising Sun Mercenary Corps, which seemed to be a strong contingent of fighters, was swept clean in a moment. Of the 19 people that came up, including Rode the Bandit, none was able to run away. Every one of them fell in a pool of blood. "Hank, you go and gather everyone. We have to get to the Fire Plume Ridge tonight," Serena ordered Hank as she wiped the blood from her sword. "We're not resting in Black Hills Town?" Hank was stunned. "Thuzaden will be back soon. If you don't mind him chatting with you, you can rest here." Serena pulled a rope out of her backpack and slowly lowered it down the window. Meanwhile, she muttered to herself, "Anyway, I do mind." "Thuzaden is still there?" Hank's hair stood up in horror, and his face was full of panic upon hearing this. "I've asked someone to draw him away just now. I expect him to be back soon." Serena's pretty face froze mid-sentence. She looked at the stairway and pursed her lips. I mean, he's back now." As soon as Serena's voice fell, everyone felt a cold aura coming from the stairway. Thuzaden walked in a very strange way. His pace was light and fast, with no sound at all, and his legs couldn't be seen moving. They could only see the long, black robes dragging on the ground, and he seemed to levitate like a ghost. Thuzaden stood at the end of the corridor and looked at the pool of blood on the ground. There was still no expression on his pale face. No one knew what he was thinking. "Unfortunately, none of you can leave." At the moment of Thuzaden's appearance, the expression on Serena's face was absolutely fascinating. She stood there, tongue-tied, for a long time as if she had been caught stealing. Finally, she squeezed out a smile that was uglier than crying. Did you have dinner, Mage Thuzaden?" Several members of the Silver Hand almost bumped into the wall when they heard this. "Cut the crap, Captain Serena. You know what I'm here for." Actually, Mage Thizadin, what prospects do you have, following Kalidra? Why not join the Silver Hand? How could his idiotic mercenary corps be compared to us, the Silver Hand? Look at you, still not married at such an age. If you're willing to join the Silver Hand, this matter is on me. I'll introduce you to some beautiful women in the corps some other day. Huh? You don't like beautiful women? What about handsome guys? What do you think of this fellow, Hank? Lin Li listened to it with his mouth wide agape. Only then did he understand where Hank had learnt the persuasion skills he had used on himself. Everyone's expression went blank. Several members of the Silver Hand turned their heads. If possible, they really wanted to climb to the top of the inn and shout, "We don't know this woman," thrice. Nobody noticed that Serena's petite hand had quietly reached behind her, slowly grasping the handle of the sword. Yes, but it'll have to be next time. Thizadin stretched out his thin fingers, and an electric arc flickered lightly on his fingertips. Then, Serena's sword fell to the floor with a clang. Besides, Captain Serena, it's not a good habit to handle weapons when discussing business. Serena gritted her teeth. Thizadin, you've got guts. Thizadin said nothing, but pulled back his lips to reveal a stiff smile. Together with his pale face, the smile looked really creepy. The strength approaching the level of an archmage was too powerful. Thizadin stood at the end of the corridor, but everyone could feel a tremendous pressure. The archers hiding in the room dared not move at all. With their strength, they could attack the mercenaries who had their guts frightened out. If they wanted to sneak an attack on Thizadin, who was close to the level of the archmage, it was almost the same as seeking death. A magic spell from him would be enough for them to die several times. Mage Thizadin, Serena turned her eyes, and tried to struggle with a few more words. Serena, you talk too much. However, Thizadin did not give her a chance. Just as Serena was about to open her mouth, the dark staff in Thizadin's hand was raised high. In a moment, a violent magical wave spread out, and the crystal at the top of the staff emitted a dazzling light, turning Thizadin's face into a ghastly white. Almost at the same time that Thizadin's staff was lifted, the 8 archers hidden in the room moved. They had to move. Once a mage of Thizadin's rank took control of the fight's rhythm, the only thing that awaited everyone would be death. For a moment, the reverberations from the bowstrings being loosened sounded unceasingly. A speck of cold light burgeoned in the dark, dazzling like the evening star in the dark sky. Swoosh! 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 The sharp sound of breaking the atmosphere sounded continuously. However, what followed was not the muffled sound of sharp arrows piercing the body, but clanking like the chime of gold and iron upon contact with each other. Sharp arrows tore open the air, only to encounter a pile of dead white skeletons. Sparks flew in the twinkling of an eye, and the sound of gold coming in contact with iron resounded endlessly. The razor-sharp arrows seemed powerless in the face of the impenetrable skeletal shield. Necromancer! Lin Li's heart tightened involuntarily at the sight of the dead white skeletal shield. No wonder the aura on this fellow was so weird. He turned out to be a necromancer, a distant relative of the Lich. It was a profession rarer than a dinosaur. Forsaking mysterious knowledge and turning to darkness for power, few mages were willing to do such a thing. There was an essential difference between being buried in the laboratory all day and dealing with the undead. The former was admired, while the latter abhorred. Lin Li was curious, what would cause a person to give up on elements and turn to darkness? Unfortunately, Thizadin was not intending to tell him why for the time being. Why not? Simple. Thizadin was busy. He was busy reciting a spell. One of the greatest characteristics of the necromancers was that the time spent reciting a spell was very short. It sounded urgent and quick, just like a scream. There was only a scream from Thizadin, and a muffled explosion sounded in the corridor. There was a spatter of blood and flesh where Road fell, and in a flash, 2 archers who had just come out of the room were swallowed up. It was a horrifying scene. The flesh and blood splashed like shrapnel into the archers' bodies. They were blown up like honeycombs before they even had time to scream out. Corpse explosion. Even Lin Li did not expect this fellow to be so cruel. It seemed that he was going to kill not only Serena, but all the people in the inn. There were more than a dozen bodies lying on the ground. If he was really going to use a serial corpse explosion, let alone the people in the corridor, perhaps even the inn would be torn down by him. It seemed like Lin Li could not go on just watching anymore. Taking advantage of the bloody fog that shrouded Thuzetan's sight, Lin Li quietly retreated a few steps. He slowly took out the crossbow that was hanging on his back with one hand, all the while feeling more or less nervous. Since transmigrating, he had not used this thing for a long time. It had better not miss at a critical time like this. On the other side, Serena picked up her sword on the ground, and there was a silver flame all over her body. This was combat energy unique to a warrior above level 10. In Jirian's words, only a warrior with combat energy could be regarded as a real warrior. Until then, they were just a bunch of barbaric rascals. Combat energy not only brought about the improvement of combat effectiveness, but also greatly enhanced the resistance of the warrior to various magic. The combat energy could even absorb some relatively low-level spells, which would not even cause any harm to the warrior at all. Serena, shrouded in the silver combat energy, seemed to be bathing in the moonlight. The sharp sword turned into a silver stream and split open a large piece of dead white skeletons in an instant. Thuzetan did not even bat an eyelid in the face of Serena's sword. He held his magic staff high up in the air. With a shrill recitation, several corpses that were lying in the pool of blood suddenly moved. Although their movements seemed slow and stiff, they had covered the opening made by Serena as soon as they stood up. These two bodies were undoubtedly more frightful than the skeletal shield. Serena's reflexes were quick. As soon as the two corpses stood up, she quickly withdrew. A muffled boom followed, and the two corpses exploded in the middle of the corridor. Blood and flesh splattered on the walls on both sides. The clapping sounds continued, and the heavy force made everyone's scalps tingle. The necromancer, who was standing in a pile of corpses, was like a warrior whose pockets were filled with the bull's strength potion. He was almost invincible under the same level. Moreover, Serena's griffin mount was not around at present. In terms of personal strength alone, she was still a long way from Thuzetan, who was almost at the level of an archmage. Serena was sent flying when the corpses exploded. If it wasn't for the protection of the silver combat energy, this serial corpse explosion alone would have cost her half her life. Hank and others wanted to go forward and help, but before they could rush up, they were already blocked by several corpses. The necromancer, who was standing among the corpses, was indeed fearful. He could control the corpses to fight at will and blast them up whenever necessary. When 3 or 4 corpses exploded in tandem, the power they released was perhaps no less than a spell of a magic shooter. Looks like this guy really wants to tear down the inn. Lin Li quietly moved back a few steps. After making sure there were no bodies around, he stopped carefully. Then, he slowly took down the crossbow on his back, and loaded the slot with a sun spike. When everything was ready, Lin Li only had to wait for an opportunity. And Lin Li hadn't been kept waiting for too long. After another series of corpse explosion, the opportunity suddenly presented itself. Annoyed with Serena, who was struggling on obstinately, Thuzetan seemed to have lost his patience. He controlled 6 bodies at the same time with a shrill recitation. When these 6 bodies wobbled up from the ground, almost everyone present felt their scalps go numb. If they were to explode all at once, wouldn't the floor be blown up as well? Then, they saw the 6 staggering bodies surround the people from the silver hand. This time, Thuzetan's recitation seemed to be slower than before. After all, it was a serial corpse explosion with 6 corpses. It was impossible for even a figure of the archmage level to complete the recitation in an instant. In theory, a necromancer could control countless undead army. However, the more undead creatures one controlled, the more mental strength and mana would be required. For a battle that involved thousands of undead creatures like the one in the Shadowglen, perhaps only the 2 horrifying undead lords could do it. In this aspect, Lin Li was actually well suited for the necromancer profession. With his innate superiority in mental strength and mana, only a little more research was needed to attain achievements that most necromancers could not attain in their lifetime. Granted, he had to be willing. There were many ways to pursue power, and it was not necessary to associate with undead creatures in order to obtain formidable power. Almost everyone's hearts were raised as the 6 bodies approached. Thuzedan had too great an advantage. If this was a close battle, he would never have imagined controlling 6 corpses at the same time. But, unfortunately, the power of both sides was not at the same level at all. Thuzedan's strength was close to that of the Archmage, while on the Silver Hand side, the strongest of them, Serena, was only level 12. Without the help of the Griffin, she was not much stronger than Rode. With this tremendous advantage, Thuzedan had spared no effort at all. He sealed them up easily with a few bone spears and a skeletal wall. They could neither advance nor retreat, and could only watch as the 6 corpses staggered towards them while Thuzedan recited the spell for corpse explosion. The speed of Thuzedan's recitation increased, glittering sweat fell from Serena's pretty face. The serial corpse explosion just now had injured Serena a little. At this time a cut on her arm was bleeding profusely. Blood was trickling down her arm, making a drip-drop sound as it fell onto the floor. However, Serena paid it no heed at all. She held her sword tightly in her hands and chopped at the skeletal wall in front of her again and again. It felt like an ant biting an elephant. The futile struggle was sad to behold. Clack! 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 The blade made monotonous and dull sounds upon contact with the skeletal wall. Serena's efforts could be said to be in vain. The disparity in strength between both sides was too great. The skeletal wall Thuzedan released was enough to trap her firmly. By the time she split the 1-meter-thick bone wall, Thuzedan's corpse explosion would have been released long ago. But Serena refused to give up. She clenched her teeth, and under the cover of the silver combat energy, she pounded on the wall again and again. At present, Serena was like a moth plunging into fire. Almost every impact would leave her badly battered, but she seemed to have no sense of it at all. She wiped the bloodstains off her forehead, then bent over to pick up her sword and started a new round of pounding. Once, twice, thrice. Even Lin Li did not think that the seemingly eccentric beautiful captain was so tenacious. Lin Li developed a tinge of respect for her as he gazed at the thin figure. Serena was perfectly demonstrating to everyone the true meaning of the word perseverance in her own way. With Serena's continuous hits, Thuzedan's recitation became louder, sharper, and harsher. It even carried with it a hint of hoarseness. A strong death aura surged wildly, and a wisp of substance like black mist gradually diffused. The previously bright corridor became pitch dark all of a sudden. Everyone's heart sank concurrently as the black mist pervaded the air. Everyone from the Silver Hand knew that after the dark clouds gathered, it would be raining cats and dogs. They even saw Thuzedan slowly raising his staff. But, at that moment, the fluent recitation suddenly stopped. It was like a person singing at the top of his lungs was suddenly being strangled. The men from the Silver Hand were dumbstruck, and so was Thuzedan. The difference was that Thuzedan knew what had happened to him, and he was clearer than anyone else. This was mana retroaction. Thuzedan's pale face showed for the first time a look of astonishment. He was a level 14 magic shooter. Someone who could use the mana retroaction on him had to be at least level 12. This was what really puzzled Thuzedan. There were only a few living people in this corridor, and they were either warriors or archers. Where did this magic shooter with a strength beyond that of level 12 come from? Though in doubt, Thuzedan was a figure approaching the level of an archmage, after all. Even if he was suddenly afflicted with a mana retroaction, he was still able to keep his calm, for he knew that mana retroaction couldn't affect himself at all. Even if there was a magic shooter above level 12 in the room, and even if he had encountered a mana retroaction, what about it? The skeletal wall that was previously erected could buy enough time for him. As soon as the effect of mana retroaction was over, he could regain control of the rhythm of the battle immediately. It's nothing, this is just a little hitch. Or so Thuzedan told himself. However, just a moment later, he found that it was not merely a small hitch. At the moment when his mana was interrupted, Thuzedan suddenly felt that a massive and incomparable divine power coming at him. At last, the look on Thuzedan's face changed, from surprise to shock. And from shock to despair, while all of this happened only in a moment. Since the time that he had chosen the necromancer profession, the expression on Thuzeden's face had never been as splendid as it was today. Swish! Following the shrill sound of breaking the air, a ray of silver instantly tore away the thick black mist. The strength of the thick skeleton was like a thin veil in front of this silver light, completely torn with merely a slight poke. And then, there was a splash of blood. Impossible! Thuzeden screamed. The scream sounded like the cry of a night owl. The sun's spike shot through the chest and out from the back. The small bolt left a bloody hole the size of a bowl in Thuzeden's chest. Blood gushed out from the hole in the chest, even. For a half-dead creature like Thuzeden, whose blood was almost dried, he still had blood, albeit it didn't seem to be particularly in an upsurge. Despair froze Thuzeden's face. He staggered back a few steps, trying to cover the wound with his hand. But how could such a large wound be covered by a thin palm? With blood pouring out, Thuzeden could only bow his head to see what had killed him. The expression of despair on Thuzeden's face seemed to relax suddenly after seeing that half-a-sun spike, and it was replaced by a look of sudden enlightenment. So it's you. After saying this sentence, the necromancer, who was rarer than a dinosaur, fell to the floor just like that. Under the purification of the divine power that was contained in the sun's spike, his body seemed to be on fire, burned completely in a flash. The corridor was surprisingly quiet. Everyone stood dumbfounded, including Serena, who was holding her sword tightly. At the moment when Thuzeden released the corpse explosion, almost everyone thought they were going to die. They didn't expect that things would turn around in the end. Before they could figure out what was going on, the mighty necromancer was suddenly turned into a mass of ashes, disappearing without a trace as soon as the wind blew over. It was without warning or reason. It felt like a heart attack patient who suddenly fell to the ground while talking. This was simply too bizarre. Serena slowly turned around and looked at the end of the corridor. Near the window, there stood a man clad in red leather armor, holding a crossbow in his hands. He asked meekly, "He's not going to revive, is he?" Everyone's eyes fell on Lin Li at his words. The dozen of Silver Hand members had the same thought in their hearts. This fellow has hit the jackpot. Who was Thuzeden? He was the only necromancer in Alana's many mercenary corps. He also had a strength close to an archmage. It was no exaggeration to say that the half of the success of the Rising Sun Mercenary Corps at present could be attributed to Thuzeden. If it hadn't been for Thuzeden's existence, how could they have squeezed their way into one of Alana's top 10 mercenary corps? But, just a while ago, the famous necromancer had died in the hands of a low-level warrior. No one could have imagined that the battle would end in such a dramatic way. Just when everyone had lost all hope, a low-level warrior had raised his crossbow, and using a bolt that possessed the divine power, he easily shot and killed a figure close to the level of an archmage. This guy was extremely lucky. It happened exactly when Thuzeden failed to cast his spell and was at his weakest, and it just so happened that the other fellow was in possession of a bolt that contained divine power. As a result of these coincidences that had happened in succession, Thuzeden was sent on a road to ruin, and this fellow was also sent to the position of man of the moment in the Silver Hand. Shooting Thuzeden was tantamount to saving more than a dozen people from the Silver Hand, including Captain Serena herself. Such kindness could not be expressed in a word or two of gratitude. This thing alone was enough to make the whole Silver Hand regard him as a distinguished guest. Under such circumstances, no matter what request he put forward, Captain Serena would probably agree to it without a second thought. For such a favorable turn in life, the admiration of the Silver Hand members could only be summed up in a sentence: hit the jackpot. Unfortunately, the low-level warrior who had hit the jackpot did not have any awareness of it at all. The fellow was holding the crossbow, mumbling in puzzlement to himself. This something of a mage, looking all so mighty, turned out to be all an act. He died with just one shot. I thought he was going to release some powerful spell. Listening to these words that would warrant a good whacking, Serena only felt her eyebrows twitch violently. She finally suppressed the impulse of whacking someone up, and answered with some difficulty, He's unlucky. Oh. Mr. Fellick, apart from Sean, perhaps only Hank knew Lin Li's background well among all the people present. The more Hank listened to the latter's words, the more he was convinced there was something fishy about it. How could a character like him utter such ignorant words? However, just as Hank opened his mouth, he suddenly noticed that the young mage was looking at him. Although the smile on his face was temperate, Hank saw clearly the note of warning in his eyes. The threatening look startled Hank. What would be consequences of provoking this young mage? Hank dared not even think about it. What happened to the group of bandits who had infuriated him back in Black Hills town? The Ruby Moon Mercenary Corps had also angered him in the Thousand Leaves Bar, and what was their end? Hank did not want to be slain by the monster next to him, much less have an icicle stab his chest. So, Hank wisely chose to bury his head. Seeing Hank had kept silent, Lin Li smiled in contentment. No kidding, if I were to be exposed by you, wouldn't the things I did before be in vain? It was also a coincidence, Lin Li had only wanted to avoid being discovered by Thuzaden at the beginning, so he was trying to restrain the magical wave that emanated from him. With his mental strength, it was natural that he knew how to do it without any difficulty at all. If Lin Li was willing, he could even control the magical wave on him to a completely static level. Even a legendary figure would not be able to judge his real strength by the magical wave he emitted. And the fact proved that it was indeed a successful sneak attack. Thuzaden totally did not notice that there was a mage who was no less powerful than himself in the corridor. The mana retroaction at the critical moment had decided the outcome of the battle. As for the sun spike that followed, it was not as crucial as people thought it to be. After controlling Thuzaden with the mana retroaction, Lin Li actually had a list of ways to kill him easily. The sun spike was just one of the most effortless ways to kill him. After shooting down Thuzaden, Lin Li suddenly remembered Hank's proposal. To be honest, he was really interested in the proposal. The Silver Hand was a big tree, hitching a ride with them to the Fire Plume Ridge could save him half the effort. He could get the map and the carriage easily when the time came, and in case he needed help with trivial errands, he could borrow a few people from the Silver Hand to help him. However, the problem was that this was a fair world, one had to do his duty after he had enjoyed the rites. What if the Silver Hand had encountered trouble at the Fire Plume Ridge? Wouldn't he be falling on hard times together with them as well? So, Lin Li hesitated for a moment, and politely declined. He disliked trouble, and disliked helping others solve their troubles. Nevertheless, when Thuzaden died, the trouble disappeared. He was now the life-savior of all those present, and a low-level warrior. What did you expect a low-level warrior to do? He wouldn't be able to bear such a heavy duty, and too light a duty was unnecessary. He was their captain's life-savior. Were they going to make their benefactor run errands for them? Hence, Lin Li, wearing the fire-salamandered leather armor and carrying a crossbow on his back, was conscientiously playing the role of a low-level warrior there. Sure enough, being low-key was the king's way. Lin Li was proud to think so, but he had forgotten that such behavior was also called being pretentious. As Lin Li predicted, when Serena heard that he was going to the Fire Plume Ridge, she invited him to travel together with them enthusiastically. Serena's excuse was, if we go together, we can look after one another in case anything happens. Of course, an excuse was only an excuse. Whether it was Serena herself or the pretentious Lin Li, both knew very well what the words meant. Young man, the Fire Plume Ridge is a dangerous place. With your strength of a low-level warrior, you had better come along with us. Anyway, Lin Li hitchhiked to the Fire Plume Ridge before dawn. After chatting with Serena along the way, Lin Li gradually realized that the Silver Hand had camped in the Fire Plume Ridge 2 days ago. And it was not just the Silver Hand that went to the Fire Plume Ridge this time. 2 of Alana's 3 major mercenary corps went there as well, plus 4 mercenary corps that were strong enough to enter Alana's top 10. As to why these mercenary corps were gathered in the Fire Plume Ridge overnight, Serena did not divulge it, but only said that there was a very big mission to accomplish. For this mission, the 6 major mercenary corps had even blocked the road from Black Hills town to the Fire Plume Ridge. Lin Li felt relieved when he heard the news. Fortunately, he had gotten a free ride from the Silver Hand. Otherwise, just thinking about how to get through these posts would be enough to make his head pound. It was not because he was afraid of these adventurers. These mercenary corps were powerful, but in the eyes of Lin Li, they were not forces that he couldn't compete against. With his present strength, there were very few things that could frighten him except the huge Marathon family. But this would bring him trouble. In case of conflict, it would inevitably affect his trip to the Fire Plume Ridge. It would do more harm than good if the time for return was delayed, resulting in him missing the invite from the Pharmacists' Guild. All in all, this fellow had temporarily joined the Silver Hand Mercenary Corps as a low-level warrior. Under the full moon, several carriages rushed towards the direction of the Fire Plume Ridge. Black Hills town was exceptionally bustling tonight. Thuzedan's continuous corpse explosions almost tore down the whole inn. It was not until the carriages had gone away that the innkeeper, who got slapped in the face, finally raised his head from behind the counter in trepidation. Thank heavens for sending these guys away. Watching the billowing dusts and smoke from the carriage, the middle-aged man's face revealed an expression of relief. However, the end soon gave him a headache. These guys had left enough compensation before they left, but could the second floor, which had been ravaged by the serial corpse explosion, be cleaned up in 2 days? It seemed that he would be busy for a period of time. What a bane, the middle-aged man sighed, and was about to go up to the second floor to tidy up when he suddenly heard the sound of horses' hooves coming from a distance. Then, he saw a few carriages approaching from the curtain of night. At first, he thought that the adventurers who had just left returned. But when he saw the crest on the carriages, his face turned white in horror. Painting the family crest on the carriage was the privilege of the nobles. The middle-aged man had been running the inn in Black Hills town for a long time, and had seen many nobles, but he'd never expected the carriages to be painted with a golden hammer. Men from the Marathon family. Just as the innkeeper's face paled, the carriages had slowly come to a stop at the door of the inn. A young man, who looked less than 30 years of age, stepped down from the carriage. His long, golden hair looked extremely dazzling even in the dark. His handsome face and ruby eyes, in addition to his lengthy black robe, filled him with a devilish charm. When he pulled up the corners of his mouth and smiled, it reminded people of a phrase, a smile like the devil's. What a backwater, the young man seemed to complain in a low voice when he got out of the carriage. Then, he turned around, and waved to the innkeeper. You, come here. Honorable sir, I'm at your disposal. This was a member of the Marathon family. As soon as he saw the young man waving at him, the innkeeper hurried forward, and greeted him with a bow. Did someone create a ruckus here tonight? How do you know? The innkeeper started in astonishment. After all, he was only a businessman. Even if he was knowledgeable and experienced, he could never understand that a mage could infer innumerable pieces of information with only a trace of residual magical wave. You don't need to worry about how I know, you just have to answer my question. Take a good look at this. Was there a person like this who checked into your inn? After speaking, the young man took out a picture from his pocket and handed it to the innkeeper, who was still hunched. The picture showed a young man, similarly in a long black robe. He looked to be in his 20s, he had short black hair and dark pupils. His face was handsome, and his smile gentle, he looked very likable at first sight. The innkeeper took the picture and looked at it with furrowed brows for a long while before he nodded, though somewhat uncertain. It seems that there was such a person. Where is he now? He just left. Left? Yes, about half an hour ago. He left in a horse carriage. Half an hour ago, the young man thought about it, and took out a bag of gold coins from his pocket. The bag was heavy, there were over 100 gold coins in it. The young man held it in his hand, shaking it in front of the innkeeper. Think about where this man went in the carriage. If you can recall, this bag of gold coins is yours. Right, let me remind you. If you dare to lie to me. I dare not, the innkeeper hastened to clarify that he was telling the truth. This person was from the Marathon family. He would not dare to deceive the Marathon family for a bag of gold coins even if he was given 100 times more nerve. The innkeeper frowned tightly, and after a long period of contemplation, he finally recalled it. Yes, I remember, the adventurers with him seem to have said that they are going to the Fire Plume Ridge. The Fire Plume Ridge? The young man put the gold coin in the hands of the innkeeper, then quickly walked to the carriage. He whispered a few words to someone in the carriage. After some time, he raised his head and ordered the other carriages, "We must get to the Fire Plume Ridge before dawn." It was only a 2 hours' journey from Black Hills town to the Fire Plume Ridge. Lin Li lay in the carriage. He had barely shut his eyes for a moment when he felt the unique temperature of the Fire Plume Ridge. "Mr. Fellick, we're here." Hank halted the carriage and cautiously woke Lin Li up. "So fast?" Lin Li rubbed his eyes, still sleepy. When he came halfway out of the carriage, he suddenly stopped. "Hank, my name is Fellick, not Mr. Fellick. Also, I'm a level 5 warrior, not a mage. You might be having a little problem if you mistake me again." 6 mercenary corps had pitched 6 camps at the foot of the Fire Plume Ridge. Among them, the Silverhands camp was on the outskirts. After Lin Li got out of the carriage, he saw hundreds of tents closely linked together, which meant that there were at least thousands of adventurers. For a while, Lin Li couldn't help wondering what kind of mission it was to attract 6 powerful mercenary corps at the same time. Alana's 3 major mercenary corps were no joke. Although Lin Li was not very clear about the strength of the other 2, he knew more or less about the Silver Hand because of Aina. Even without mentioning the famous Silver Storm, the Silver Hand alone had thousands of adventurers of all levels, of which there were at least hundreds of people over level 10. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, Lin Li would have hardly believed that there was a mission the Silver Hand could not accomplish alone, forcing them to collaborate with other mercenary corps. Collaboration was not common for mercenary corps. As the saying goes, 2 of a trade could never agree. It was particularly so for heavyweights such as the 3 major mercenary corps. They were each other's ultimate foes. The 3 major Alana mercenary corps each controlled thousands of adventurers. With such a large number of them, contradictions and conflicts were natural in daily life. When it came to conflicts of interest, this kind of contradiction would become particularly more intense. It would be harder to get them to cooperate than to reach for the sky. But, this time, the mission had really brought them together, and it seemed that they were cooperating well. At least they did not fight as soon as they met when they were pitching their tents together. With some doubts in mind, Lin Li followed Serena and the gang, heading towards the Silverhands camp. The Silverhands camp was well laid out. More than 100 tents occupied a large stretch of the open space. Around the tents, temporary posts were erected. Several sharp-eyed archers were standing guard on the posts. Below the posts, a group of fully armed warriors was patrolling the camp. Good vigilance. This was Lin Li's evaluation of the Silver Hand. That was why he was puzzled. How could the vigilant Silver Hand let their captain be trapped in the inn and almost killed by a group of adventurers with lackluster strength? Unfortunately, before he figured it out, he noticed a familiar figure. The tent in the center was the largest one in the whole camp. It was undoubtedly the temporary headquarters of the Silver Hand. The familiar figure that came out of the tent looked to be in his 20s, and was dressed up as a warrior. His blonde hair was particularly dazzling in the early morning sunshine. F***CK, how come it's this fella? Lin Li jumped in surprise. It was Elijah who came out of the tent. Lin Li hadn't seen this fellow after they had visited the black market together the other day. Lin Li was bewildered initially. He clearly told him to come to the Guild of Magic the next day to collect the bull's strength potion, but the fellow was nowhere in sight. Lin Li then realized that this fellow had come to the Fire Plume Ridge one step ahead of himself. It made sense on the second thought too. This fellow was also a captain of one of the top 10 mercenary corps. It was not surprising that he had a share in such missions. He had come on his own, but why did he have to pick such a time to appear? Lin Li's head pounded. It was not a good thing to bump into Elijah at this moment. If this fellow was insensible, and revealed his background in a word, he'd be in big trouble. Captain Serena, you're back." Elijah saw the men from the Silver Hand coming from afar, and went up to greet them anxiously. However, Elijah's face froze halfway mid-stride, for he found Lin Li among the group of people. "Ma. Captain Elijah, is it really you?" How would Lin Li dare to give him the chance to speak? In case he called out Mage Felix, how was he going to explain it? Just as the expression on Elijah's face froze, Lin Li went up and greeted Elijah with a face full of surprise, hugging him enthusiastically. "When are you going to pay me back?" Elijah almost bit his tongue. He thought, "Aren't you the one who owes me 3 bottles of Bull's strength potion? Why did it suddenly become me owing you money?" Fortunately, Elijah was smart. When he saw the weird expression on Lin Li's face, he knew that the young mage had to have something he wanted to hide. He dared not treat the matter slightly, and immediately picked up the conversation. "This? Can we put it off for a while? Again? You've been holding off on it for months." Seizing the chance of pressing for debt, Lin Li said to Elijah in a low voice, "Remember, you don't know anything except that you owe me money, do you understand?" "I understand," Elijah nodded, but the look on his face was exceptionally embarrassed. He was the captain of one of the 10 most impressive mercenary corps, but was pressed to pay debt in public. If this were to spread, he didn't know where he could put his face. "Captain Elijah, what's the matter?" Fortunately, Serena spoke in time to save Elijah from the embarrassment. "Well, Captain Serena, I've done what you asked me to do yesterday. The drawings are in your tent now. Would you like to go and take a look at them now?" "I'll go right now." Serena nodded, and called Hank over to help Lin Li and others find a place to settle down. At the beginning, Lin Li actually wanted to call Elijah over. One reason was to standardize their versions, and another was to inquire about the mission. It didn't matter if Serena refused to say it, Elijah wouldn't not say, would he? Unfortunately, Serena did not give him a chance to. Before entering the tent, she stopped Elijah, and said that she had something to discuss with him. So, Lin Li had no choice but to follow Hank. They found 2 tents near the campfire in the north of the camp, and settled down. "Hank, come in and have a chat." Lin Li had dozed off in the carriage earlier on, and had forgotten to ask many questions. He had plenty of time now, anyway, so he was not in a rush to rest. He made Hank stay, and asked the question that he had failed to figure out an answer to on the way here. "Tell me, how did you all get surrounded by the Rising Sun Mercenary Corps last night?" The reason why Lin Li wanted to know was not because he was interested in gossip. Thuzedan's last words had left a deep impression on him. So it's you." Whoever listened to these words, that were uttered by a necromancer, would be horrified. What was the difference between being remembered by a necromancer and being targeted by a venomous snake? Hence, Lin Li urgently wanted to know what was hidden behind it. "We were betrayed," was Hank's opening remark. It wasn't complicated. Last evening, Serena brought them to Black Hills town to collect a lot of supplies. However, their carriage was ambushed just as they were halfway through their journey. Hank vividly remembered that it was Rode who had attacked them. It was simply too much of a coincidence, just as if it had been planned. It happened when Serena brought only a few of them to Black Hills town for the handover. Serena took only 6 people at that time, including Hank, all of whom were low-level adventurers below level 10. Moreover, Serena did not bring the Griffin along. The Silver Hand had suffered a big loss in this sneak attack. The battle was almost one-sided. The men that Rode had brought along were all around level 10, and it was a surprise attack to boot. They had killed 2 of Silverhand's men upon appearing. Fortunately, Serena's reaction was quick. Once she saw that the situation was far from good, she led the rest of them back to Black Hills town immediately. While escaping, Serena also laid several traps, which helped to leave Rode and his men behind for the time being. After the party from the Silver Hand fled to Black Hills town, they immediately found an inn and hid in it. They had planned to wait until after dark to sneak back into the Fire Plume Ridge. However, nobody expected that the men from the Rising Sun Mercenary Corps were lurking in Black Hills town. Although there were only 2 bandits, they immediately informed Rode of the Silver Hand's whereabouts. When Serena discovered the two bandits, it was too late. Hence, they had to play it by ear and pretend to know nothing. They continued to stay in the inn, but at the same time, Serena slipped out and found Aragon and others nearby. However, perhaps even Serena did not realize that, this time, not only Rode and his men came, but also the Rising Sun Mercenary Corps' most famous figure, Thuzetan, the necromancer. If it weren't for Lin Li's abrupt help, the Silver Hand would be in big trouble this time. Lin Li nodded his head when Hank finished speaking, agreeing with his earlier speculation. The matter was too obvious. If someone hadn't let the cat out of the bag, how could Rhodes' men be so smart, blocking them on the road? Furthermore, they could even foresee their escape, and planted two bandits in Black Hills town on watch duty. What's the origin of that Thuzetan? However, how the two mercenary corps fought had little to do with Lin Li. He did not even ask Hank why the Rising Sun Mercenary Corps was so bold to fight against the Silver Hand. What he wanted to know the most was about the necromancer, Thuzetan. The words left by that fellow before his death were so frightening that Lin Li feared he would not be able to sleep soundly if he didn't figure it out. However, it was obvious that Hank did not know much about Thuzetan. He frowned and pondered for a long time, but still could not explain it. This Thuzetan is very mysterious. Many people know that he is a member of the Rising Sun Mercenary Corporation. However, no one knows when and for what reason he joined them. We, the Silver Hand, investigated him 2 years ago, but the results of the investigation are not very clear to me. Oh, Lin Li nodded, and did not continue his questions, because he knew that even if he continued to ask, he wouldn't get anything out of Hank. After all, he was only a junior member, and was far from getting access to the core secrets of the Silver Hand. It seemed that he should find an opportunity to inquire Serena about it. Lin Li was hesitating on what excuse he'd use to look for Serena when someone else entered the tent. Lin Li looked up, and saw that it was Captain Elijah, who hadn't paid back the money he owed. "You finished the discussion?" When Lin Li saw Elijah come in, he knew that this fellow had to have come to standardize their stories. He said nothing, but smiled and motioned him to find a place to sit first. "I'm just running errands, and what to do depends on Captain Serena's opinions." Elijah found a place to sit down, then looked at Hank hesitantly. Hank was not a fool either. He saw Elijah's hesitant look, and knew they had something to talk about to each other alone. He stood up quickly, and said, "Mr. Fellick, if there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first. If you need anything, you can come to me anytime. My tent is just in front. MHM, go and do your stuff. I'll come to you later if I need your help. Then, see you later." This. Mr. Fellick, after watching Hank leave, Elijah paused for a while, then asked with a bitter smile, "How much should I owe you?" "You can't owe me too much. I'm a level 5 warrior. I won't be able to take out too much of a loan," Lin Li considered, and said a number. "If not, you'll owe me 500 gold coins. You can say that I sold you a batch of herbs last time, but you haven't had time to pay yet." "Alright, 500 gold coins it is then." "Oh, right," Lin Li thought for a moment, and took out 3 bottles of bull's strength potion he had long prepared from his pocket. "This is the reward I promised at the beginning." "Thank you, Mr. Fellick." "Right, Elijah, how's your relationship with the Rising Sun Mercenary Corp?" "Rising Sun Mercenary Corp?" Elijah put the 3 bottles of bull's strength potions in his pocket gingerly. "I don't have many dealings with them. I'm not exactly on good terms with them, but we're not exactly on bad terms either. We'd probably just greet each other if we meet, and then turn around like strangers." "Then, are you familiar with Thuzetan?" "I know a little about this." Elijah mused for a moment, then continued, "Thuzetan joined the Rising Sun Mercenary Corps last year. As far as I know, this man has quite an unordinary relationship with Glaviv, the captain of the Rising Sun Mercenary Corporation. He helped Glaviv clinch several big deals just after joining the Mercenary Corps. And I heard that this man fled from the Leaden Kingdom." "Leaden Kingdom?" Lin Li started. The Leaden Kingdom in Elijah's mouth, as he had heard, was one of the strongest military powers in Amrel. it bordered with Felon in the north. In recent decades, the contradictions between the two countries had been constant. Perhaps a war would be completely triggered between the two countries next time. The Leaden Kingdom was a typical country of faith. There were numerous churches in the kingdom, and their dominant religion was so powerful that the whole kingdom had almost become a theocracy. If this Thuzedan was really from the Leaden Kingdom, then his escape was quite logical. The Leaden Kingdom was not the Felon Kingdom. Although necromancers and Felon were abhorred, they could at least appear openly in front of people. If it were the Leaden Kingdom, necromancers would be regarded as blasphemers, and burned on the cross. A person from Leaden Kingdom coming to Felon to tell me, "So it's you." The more Lin Li thought about it, the more confused he was. The initially puzzling matter became even more confusing with the information that Elijah brought him. "By the way, Mr. Felix, why have you come to the Fire Plume Ridge?" And even, Elijah looked at the red leather armor on Lin Li, and then shifted his gaze to the crossbow on the latter's back. After uttering "even" for a long while, he couldn't find the words that would follow. This get-up was too bizarre to an extent that Elijah couldn't imagine the fellow had been wearing the long, black robe a few days ago and was going in and out of places like the Alana Guild of Magic. It's a long story. Lin Li did not try to hide it in face of Elijah's confusion. He recounted the incident at Black Hills Town, choosing only to tell him the crux of it. The Rising Sun Mercenary Corps wanted to kill Captain Serena? After listening to what happened in Black Hills Town, Elijah opened his eyes wide, and was stunned for a long time before he finally said, "Are they looking for death?" "Who knows?" Lin Li shrugged, and smiled indifferently. The two mercenary corps could kill all they wanted. As long as it didn't hinder him, Lin Li was willing to stand by and be part of the audience. "I didn't expect Glaviv to be so brave, daring to lay his hands on Captain Serena. Is he not afraid of revenge from the Silver Hand?" Elijah contemplated for a long time with mixed emotions on his face, but he still couldn't understand it. "Let's not talk about it." Lin Li was totally uninterested in this kind of fighting and killing. After a few casual words, he took the topic elsewhere. "Elijah, what's your mission this time? Why do I feel that all of you seem to be mighty nervous?" There was some hesitation in Elijah's eyes. "Never mind, I was just curious." Seeing the look on Elijah's face, Lin Li guessed that it was probably some secret mission this time, so he didn't force it. "If you can't say it, you don't have to tell me." "It's not that we can't say," Elijah gritted his teeth as if he had made up his mind. "Mr. Felix, to tell you the truth, this mission was actually entrusted to us by the president personally." "The president?" Lin Li was a little stunned at first, but then remembered that Elijah was an adventurer. Then, wasn't the president in Elijah's mouth the legendary warrior who was at the same level, 21 as Aldwin, the president of the Adventurers Guild, Sword Sage of the Storm, Alakir? "You mean, Sword Sage of the Storm?" "Yes. No wonder there are so many people." It was then that Lin Li finally understood. The mission this time turned out to be issued personally by Sword Sage of the Storm. This old man was a legendary level 21 warrior, and was the one in charge of all the adventurers in Felon Kingdom. Which mercenary corp in Alana would not rush up to him desperately with a mere word from him? That was about it. Both Elijah and Lin Li were wise enough not to touch the topic of the content of the task. This was no joke. It was a mission that involved Alana's 6 major mercenary corps at the same time. Elijah could not possibly have talked about it even if they shared a deep friendship. If news were leaked, he'd never be able to seek a living in Alana ever again. Lin Li was puzzled after sending Elijah away. With the position and strength of the Sword Sage of the Storm, what could he not do? He had actually gone so far, gathering the 6 major mercenary corps. However, it was merely puzzlement. After contemplating for a while and not getting any answer, Lin Li put the matter behind temporarily. For him, although the private entrustment of Sword Sage was sensational, it did not involve his own interests. In Lin Li's view, it was not even as important as Thuzedan's last words, before he died. What the 6 mercenary corps wanted to do was their own business, as long as they didn't hurt those Black Lotuses, even if they leveled the Fire Plume Ridge, it had nothing to do with Lin Li. What he cared about at present was when he could get the Black Lotuses. The effort he had spent in Black Hills town was not in vain. With his position as their captain's savior, Lin Li's life in the camp could be said to be quite nourishing. The whole Silver Hand was grateful to him, and they responded to almost all his requests. During lunch, Lin Li just said casually that he wanted to get a map of Fire Plume Ridge. As soon as he turned around, a deputy head of logistics had sent the map to him. Before leaving, he even inquired warmly whether Lin Li needed any other help, then thanked him again and again for his generous help in Black Hills town, making Lin Li feel slightly embarrassed over it. After lunch, Lin Li stayed in the tent, studying the map over and over. This was a map specially for the Silver Hand. It was many times more detailed than the ones sold by ordinary adventurers. After all, one was drawn by a single adventurer, and the other was continuously improved and supplemented by thousands of members. These were two different concepts. This map was too detailed. From magical beast-infested areas, to the origin of various herbs and minerals, all was labeled in detail on the map. Even some shortcuts that only the Silver Hand knew were completely drawn out. Having learned that there were black lotuses growing on the Fire Plume Ridge, Lin Li had made a lot of preparations. He spent at least 10,000 gold coins just buying information from adventurers. But even so, he did not realize that there were so many things hidden on the Fire Plume Ridge until he got this map. The Fire Plume Ridge really couldn't be mentioned in the same breath as the Nightmare Mountains. Granted, magical beasts that were found at the foot of the mountain were really weak. Most of them were just about the level of the Fire Crow, which was very suitable for adventurers at the level of Shan and his father. However, once one got to the mountainside, it would immediately become dangerous. There were often groups of magical beasts above level 10, and they'd occasionally have the opportunity to enjoy the heroic bearing of magical beasts above level 15. As for the peak of the Fire Plume Ridge, it was the most dangerous of places. Without the strength nearing level 20, one should never even dream of going up to that place. Should a legendary magical beast appear, one would be swallowed whole, with not a chance to escape. It was unknown what kind of luck Shan had back then to escape all the way from the foot of the mountain to the mountainside. He had not even encountered any danger, and managed to escape in the dark. If Shan's luck was slightly worse, his corpse would probably be decomposed now, with his strength at that time. Lin Li felt fortunate the more he looked at the map in his hands. Luckily, he had stayed in Black Hills town for the night. Luckily, he had rescued Serena from Thuzaden. If not, who knew what kind of trouble he'd encounter if he had gone to the Fire Plume Ridge on his own. But now that he had the map, everything would be much easier. After studying the map, Lin Li went to Serena again, and told her that he needed to go out and might not be back until evening. After all, the map was simply a map. Some things needed to be seen in person before the safest route could be planned. Of course, these were things that he couldn't tell Serena. Otherwise, just wearing the label of a level 5 warrior and monkeying about on the mountainside of the Fire Plume Ridge alone would take him half a day's time to explain himself. Lin Li's statement was that he was just taking a walk around the foot of the mountain. He heard that there were many herbs and minerals around there. After that, of course, he had to reveal a little knowledge of mining and herbs in order to prove that he was not spouting nonsense. The Fire Plume Ridge was a place with abundant resources. Many adventurers who knew a thing or two about herbs and minerals would come to this place to make money. After listening to him, Serena did not doubt it, but showed a little surprise. "You are a talent in this field as well?" "What kind of talent is mining and picking herbs?" Lin Li muttered as he exited the tent. He considered it for a while, and decided to call Shan to go with him. After all, Shan had spent a much longer time in the Fire Plume Ridge than himself. Now that Shan was at least level 10 in strength, it should be a lot easier to bring him along. The camps of the 6 major mercenary corps were set up on the borders of the Fire Plume Ridge. Lin Li came out of the Silver Hand's camp, and only walked forward for 10 minutes when he felt the peculiar scorch of the Fire Plume Ridge. To enter the Fire Plume Ridge from the south, one had to first cross a barren plain. This was the place where the fire crows liked to gather. Back Then, Sean and his father hunted the fire crows here, and exchanged their feathers for the money necessary for their living. After crossing this barren plain, the terrain would slowly become complicated. There were several mountain roads leading to the mountainside, one of which was a shortcut only known to the core members of the Silver Hand. This was the shortcut that Lin Li wanted to take. However, for some unknown reason, when the Silver Hand drew the map, they were vague about the introduction of this shortcut, especially for one of the caves, which had no introduction at all. They directly marked it with a black line, which made Lin Li very dejected. He had to take a look at it in person. If there was no problem with it, then he could decide on the route after returning to the camp. Lin Li had released a mana detector when he was crossing the plain. The Fire Plume Ridge was a place rich in natural resources. If he missed some precious mineral veins on the road, it would not be worth it. The two men set out from the Silver Hand camp and crossed the barren plain. It was quite calm along the way. Apart from several flocks of fire crows, there was hardly anything alive. For these two guys, the fire crows were no trouble at all. Not to mention Lin Li, even the present Sean had at least the strength of a level 10 warrior. His body was emitting a cyan combat energy as he held the huge double-edged sword in his hand, coupled with his amazing natural strength. When he waved the double-edged sword, the surroundings were suddenly filled with plumes of blue flame. The fire crows were often turned into ashes before they even managed to go near them. It could be said that their journey was without hindrances. About half an hour later, they had crossed the plain and followed a rugged mountain road upward. Soon, they saw a withered yellow forest. As soon as Lin Li saw the forest, he knew he had found the right place. The shortcut marked on the map was near the forest. When he was studying the map earlier on, Lin Li had been wondering about something. What was the meaning of this area marked in yellow? If red meant danger and green meant safety, what did yellow mean? Did it mean erotica one? Now that he got to the place, he could see that the meaning of yellow was barren. It was indeed a barren forest, everything in it seemed to be listless. Although the trees had not completely died, they did not show any vitality at all. A few pitiful leaves hung on the branches, swaying around and making a clattering sound when the hot wind occasionally blew by. This lifeless feeling seemed to be contagious. Lin Li constantly felt drowsy walking in the forest. It was the activity transmitted by the mana detector that refreshed his spirits. There was a weak magical wave. There's something. Lin Li was too familiar with the magical wave. Back in the Endless World, he loved using this method of prospecting, but at that time, he had used a necklace with mana detection property, and this time, he had really mastered this spell. The magical wave from afar was slightly weak, but Lin Li could judge almost immediately by experience that it was absolutely a magical wave emanating from the mineral veins, and it was most likely an abyss fiendish iron vein, for only the abyss fiendish iron could dye the surrounding land dark red. Currently, the earth beneath their feet displayed a hoodooing dark red, which looked to have been soaked in blood. This was the most obvious growth feature of the abyss fiendish iron. However, it was a pity that the soil was still not thoroughly red enough. If the color was darker, it could probably breed demon soul, an important ingredient of the truth elixir. From the color of the soil, it should be a poor mine. Let's go and have a look. Nevertheless, Lin Li was not going to let it go even if it was a poor mine. The abyss fiendish iron was a rare magical metal. Adding a little of it while forging could greatly enhance the power of a weapon. For a humanoid magical beast such as Sean, weapons integrated with the abyss fiendish iron were especially powerful. If they could dig up some this time, Sean's equipment set would be settled. By virtue of his superior mental strength, Lin Li had always been the most sensitive to magical waves. He took Sean through the withered and yellow forest, and within a few minutes, he found the exact location of the mineral vein. Looking from where Lin Li stood now, it was clear that there was a dim metallic luster in the dark red soil. It's indeed a poor mine. The mineral body was only slightly exposed on the surface, and Lin Li knew at once that it was a poor mine. If it were a rich mine, at least half of the mineral body would be exposed instead. Sean, lend a hand. Lin Li sought out 2 shovels from the ring of endless storm. Sean nodded, and took one of the shovels, but did not know what to do. He looked at Lin Li with a blank face. Dig from here, until you reach this point. Lin Li drew a line on the ground, and signaled him to dig along that line. He still felt not quite at ease after thinking about it, so he reminded Sean, use little strength. Don't you damage the mine. Lin Li took out only 2 ordinary shovels. If it were others, he would not need to deliberately remind them. Perhaps only a humanoid magical beast like Sean needed to be told to use little strength. Yes, Mr. Fellick. Sean's comprehension ability wasn't that good, but his execution was meticulous. Just as Lin Li finished speaking, he swung his shovel and began digging. As soon as this humanoid magical beast started to work, there were only clumps of soil spattering all around. The shovel was like a bulldozer, digging up a large area with loud clangs. This fellow was a born miner, the shovel in his hand swung rapidly and furiously. While Lin Li was still stunned, Sean dug a deep and long trench along the edge of the vein. And in the middle of the trench, the dark red abyss fiendish iron vein was revealed. Lin Li was flabbergasted as he held the shovel. There was indeed a distance between human and magical beast. Lin Li did not even have the time to move his hands, and Sean had finished the job for him. He stood there with the shovel in his hand, not knowing whether he should dig or not. At last, he saw that there was no need to, so he threw the shovel on the ground, and took out 2 air bomb scrolls from his pocket. It couldn't be helped. Blast mining was primitive and backward, but the Fire Plume Ridge was a remote place, there was no manpower nor tools. Lin Li had countless mining methods at his disposal, but could only settle for blast mining first. Moreover, he could only use 2 scrolls. Anduin wasn't around, and 2 scrolls were his limit. Fortunately, this was a poor mine, unlike the one found in the Nightmare Mountains, which needed 5 air bomb scrolls at the same time. That was a great work. Without a figure like Anduin around, he could not even think about it. 2 air bomb scrolls were inserted at both ends of the vein. There was nothing to study about it. Unlike the eternal adamantine, the abyss fiendish iron wouldn't produce accompanying precious gemstones. Thus, when blasting eternal adamantine mines, one had to be cautious so as not to damage the accompanying gemstones within, but there was no such concern for the abyss fiendish iron. So, he could just blast the mineral vein directly. After inserting the scrolls, Lin Li slowly took a few steps back. But just as Lin Li was trying to detonate the scrolls with his mental strength, there was a sudden rush of footsteps in the woods behind him. You two, get out of that place at once. Lin Li frowned, and looked back into the woods. He saw several people hurrying from afar. 2 archers were the fastest. As soon as Lin Li turned his head, they had rushed over with their bows drawn and arrows set just less than 30 meters before where Lin Li stood. The hostility in them was obvious even to the blind. Let us warn you again, leave that place immediately, otherwise, don't blame us for being rude. A warrior caught up and stood with the 2 archers. There came a clang as a sword was pulled out. The shimmering cold light on the sword blade made evident to everyone that he was not kidding. If Lin Li and Sean continued standing there, a battle would be imminent. What do you mean? Lin Li's eyes skimmed over the 2 archers, but he had no intention of moving his feet. He merely looked at the warrior from afar, and smiled. What's wrong with where we are standing? That vein was first discovered by us. Before the warrior answered, an archer stood up. While he spoke, his arm was lifted slightly upward. The sharp arrow was pointed directly at Lin Li's chest. In the midday sunshine, a faint blue shimmer was shining on the iron arrow. It was obvious that the arrow had been smeared with poison. A hint of fishy sweetness wafted in the air, and it made Lin Li frown. It was not a pleasant thing to be aimed at with a poisonous arrow. You've discovered it first? However, the archer's words wavered Lin Li. After all, robbing mine was a dishonorable thing, and he couldn't do it. It hardly seemed justifiable if they had really discovered the mineral vein first and he had come up from behind to mine. Yes, I found this vein in the morning, but I didn't have enough manpower, so I went back and called 2 friends with me. Morning? Lin Li came to understand as soon as he heard these 2 words. The reason why it was named the Abyss Fiendish Iron was that it shared some similarities with the Abyssal Demon in some aspects. For example, the strength of the Abyssal Demon varied with time, it was the weakest in the morning, and the strongest at night. The same was true for the magical wave emanating from the Abyss Fiendish Iron. It was the weakest in the morning, and the strongest in the evening, especially when the first ray of sunshine appeared at dawn. The Abyss Fiendish Iron magical wave was almost the same as a piece of ordinary iron. And it was a poor mine before him, the whole mineral body was almost buried underground. Without a mastery knowledge of mineral veins, it was impossible to find it. Granted, nothing was absolute in this world. Even without a mastery knowledge of mineral veins, there was still a chance of discovering the Abyss Fiendish Iron mineral vein in the morning with a perverse mental strength like Lin Li. After all, as long as it was not in the first ray of sunshine, the Abyss Fiendish Iron mineral vein would emit subtle magical wave at other times. The problem was that these guys didn't look to have perverse mental strength. Of course, they couldn't be masters of mineral veins either. Otherwise, why did he need to go back and call upon more people? He could have finished mining by himself instead of having to share the benefits with others. Right, then may I ask, what mineral vein is this exactly? Lin Li still had a smile on his face, but a wind blade quietly gathered in his hand. Since this was a vein without ownership, Lin Li needed not be polite with them. The look on the warrior's face froze when he was questioned by Lin Li out of the blue. Why do you ask so many questions? The archer at a side saw that something was wrong, and tautened the bowstring further. The sharp arrow, that was smeared with virulent poison, was aimed at Lin Li's chest. His eyes faintly revealed an intention to kill. Get out means get out, stop king spouting nonsense here. Do you really think I don't dare to kill you? Lin Li was taken aback. He had seen a lot of arrogance, but it was the first time he saw someone this arrogant. Get out means get out, what a heroic declaration this was. Lin Li felt that if he didn't cower, he'd be letting the archer's bravery down. Sean, the warrior is yours. The wind blade in his hand was just about to be released when suddenly something occurred to Lin Li recently. Sean's progress speed was so sick that even Lin Li could barely judge that his present strength was at least above level 10. Lin Li had been wondering how far the boy had improved. But ever since leaving Alana, Sean hadn't had a chance to show his skills. He'd killed some fire crows when they crossed the plain earlier on, but that was it. How could a low-level magical beast reflect the strength of a warrior above level 10? The inception of this chapter's publication is linked to N0, Vel, B, J, N. This warrior was quite suitable. If Lin Li was not mistaken, he should be the strongest of the three. He had most likely broke through to level 10. As for the weakest of the three, it turned out to be the most arrogant archer. This fellow was at most level 8 in strength. Lin Li couldn't understand why he could be so arrogant. Did he really think they were persimmons that could be pinched randomly? Oh. Sean nodded heavily, there was a faint gleam of excitement in his eyes as he looked toward the warrior. He was equally curious about his current strength. When he was in Alana, there was indeed a master who had guided him. However, the master's strength was so strong that no matter how rapidly Sean had progressed, the result did not change at all. The other party could easily defeat himself with a simple blow. The feeling was as easy as picking up a knife and fork while eating. You're going to fight us with just the two of you? How reckless, the bold archer pursed his lips and sneered. He had no regard for these two guys from the start. That big guy had a decent strength, but so what? Sandro was a level 10 warrior. Even if the big guy was impressive, he couldn't be more impressive than Sandro, right? As for the bullshit-ridden fellow, there was nothing to say about him. The crossbow he was carrying looked the part, but one could see clearly that the fellow was at most level 5 or 6 in strength. Even he could easily shoot that fellow to death. The bold archer was so confident that he hardly gave it a second thought, and fired his arrow directly. In his mind, the low-level warrior would at least be crippled even if he did not die by his arrow. However, the arrow was just fired when he suddenly heard a gust of wind by his ear. Although this fellow was arrogant, he was a real archer after all. He probably knew a lot better than others what this gust of wind meant. However, it was too late for him to dodge in haste. In an instant, there was only a crisp sound. Shoo! The bold archer felt a chill in his ear at first, followed by an excruciating pain. He touched it with his hand, and there was nothing else but blood. Where was the ear? Ah! A scream rang out among the trees, so forlorn that even the withered leaves seemed to be shivering. Almost at the same time, Sean raised his huge sword with both hands, and with a powerful chop, he greeted Sandro, who was also a level 10 warrior. The confrontation between level 10 warriors was much better to watch than that on the other side. In a moment, the two weapons fired brilliant sparks upon contact. There were no changes to Sean's battling style. But it was that barbaric fighting method that gave off such a terrifying impact under the influence of the green-colored combat energy. In a single exchange, Sean struck Sandro heavily with strength like that of a magical beast. Sandro was experienced as well. Once he noticed that he could not win against his opponent with strength, he started to tussle with Sean. To him, his opponent would not be as agile as himself. Furthermore, that great sword of his would put Sean at a disadvantage as it was better at attacking, and not defending. If he could secure one opportunity, Sandro had confidence to defeat his opponent. To be honest, that was indeed a valid strategy. If it had been a month ago, Sandro would have had an advantage over Sean. That was when Sean was also strong, but extremely poor in his battling techniques. Not to mention a level 10 warrior, even if it was Sean's previous opponent, the leader of the bandits, Sean would be facing dire consequences because of the battle if not for Lin Li's 2 bottles of potion. But Sean was not the rookie that only had a shocking strength anymore. The 1 month in Alana transformed Sean entirely. It was as though he was a brand new man. Green-colored combat energy circled, and the speed Sean displayed was not slower than Sandro's. The heavy double-edged sword in his hands became very quick and agile, and there was zero delay in its movements. No matter what Sandro did, he could gain no advantage in the duel. While the 2 level 10 warriors were caught in a deadlock, the level 5 warrior on the other side ended his battle almost instantly. That fella was rather boring. As a level 13 magic shooter, no energy was needed in getting rid of 2 low-level archers. However, he did not feel like doing so. Instead, he took the crossbow and moved backwards while he fought them, leading them to the vein of the abyss fiendish iron. Goodbye, you two. It could only be said that the 2 fellas were really unlucky. Pom. Before they could understand the situation, they were shocked by a loud sound ringing in their ears like an explosion. What followed right after that was soil particles that rose from the ground. Among the dark red soil particles in the air, there were numerous or fragments of different sizes. The big ones were of the size of a human head, while the small ones were the size of a fist. They exploded in midair like cannonballs. This was the ore of the abyss fiendish iron, the heaviest magical metal. At the moment it flew off, even warriors above level 10 would be bombed into fools on the spot, not to mention the 2 low-level archers. Fortunately, Lin Li did not intend to kill them. He merely triggered 1 air bomb scroll. Yet, even if there was only a single scroll, it was enough to create a large destruction for the duo. The feeling when the ore hit them mirrored that of big cannons' barrage. After a few POMs, the duo could be seen unconscious on the ground. Do you know it now? This is called abyss fiendish iron, and it's very heavy, Lin Li said as he rubbed his tired elbows. He found a place nearby to sit down and observe the battle of the 2 other people. At this time, Sean had already gained the upper hand. The heavy double-edged sword in Sean's hands moved like a pinwheel, and the force of its chops seemed to get larger and larger. Although Sandro was also a level 10 warrior, he was nothing compared to Sean in terms of strength. As the battle progressed, Sean seemed more and more confident, while Sandro tired and breathless. Is this guy a human? The fight was becoming more intimidating for Sandro as he fought. Although Sean had human skin, his strength was scarier than a beast's. Every time Sandro used his weapon to defend himself from the great sword, he could hear a groan of pain coming from his weapon. His decent single-handed sword that was made of refined iron almost became a scrap of metal in one battle. The torn blade could already be used as a saw, while the sword was so badly distorted that it looked like a crawling earthworm. "Fuck, I'm too unlucky," Sandro could not help but curse quietly. The results of the battle did not matter anymore. His exorbitantly expensive weapon's loss was enough to cause him to grieve for a few days. The advantageous position Sean had was enough to let him emerge as the victor in the next minute. It appeared that the hard work Sean put into training in that half a month paid off. His ability was at the peak of level 10, and he definitely had a lot of room for improvement. At the start of the fight, he was still in a deadlock with that warrior, yet as time passed, the disadvantage of the warrior became more obvious. It was not that the skills of the warrior deteriorated, but that those of Sean improved. Battles were indeed the best way to improve one's skills. It only took one battle for Sean to reap tremendous benefits. Lin Li could clearly sense that as the time Sean spent in battles grew, his combat skills became increasingly sophisticated. Sean was not as barbaric with his movements as before. He became more aware of how to best allocate his strength to defeat the warrior during the battle. "This boy's improving really quickly," Lin Li commented sincerely under his breath. Indeed, Sean was only at level 5 when he left Gerosis. Then, he developed his personal combat energy in less than 2 months. This improvement was faster than the speed of a rocket. Yet there was one thing Lin Li had forgotten. The rate of his own improvement was much faster than Sean's. When he'd just entered this world, he could not even unleash a single low-level illuminating spell. If not for Anduin, he would have been eaten up by a low-level magical beast. Yet, only a few months had passed by, and he was already at level 13. He was also able to surpass the ability of archmages in the blink of an eye. Such a crazy improvement speed was absolutely freakier than Sean's. As Lin Li gasped in bewilderment, the battle also came to an end. With the abyss fiendish iron integrated into Sean's great sword, it was moving gracefully like a pinwheel in his hand. The green-colored combat energy circling on the surface of its blade carried a rough sound. Sandro became a minor character under the fierce attack. How could a single-handed sword be able to fend off Sean, who had unleashed his entire might? At that point of time, Sandro was already on the brink of death. Every attack that he managed to dodge was avoided only with the help of his experience and his luck. Lin Li was certain that the level 10 warrior would fall under Sean's sword in less than a minute. What a waste, Lin Li sighed, and shook his head. He moved his gaze away from the two men, and focused it on the ore on the ground. Because of the outsiders, Lin Li did not dare to use the Ring of Endless Storm. He could only gather those fragments together, and wait for Sean to get rid of Sandro. However, he suddenly heard the sound of footsteps. This time, they were no small fries, but a bunch of people. Lin Li could not help but feel nervous for a second. When he wanted to get his mana ready, he realized that he knew their leader. That person was Aragon. It was him who launched the surprise attack on Road at Black Hills Town the day before. "Mr. Fellick, why are you here?" Aragon was dumbfounded when he stepped out of the forest. Wasn't the man rubbing his elbow on that pile of rocks his savior 2 days ago? Yes, and his beast-like partner. Aragon looked at Sean while he drew in a cold breath. Although he was not aware of Sean's ability, he knew the man Sean was fighting. He was Sandro, a true level 10 warrior. Judging from his capacity, he would not be able to defeat Sandro. However, seeing how the beast-like youth forced that level 10 warrior onto the brink of death, Aragon was glad that he was there. If he were to be late, Sandro was really going to die under his opponent's sword. Aragon was shocked by what he saw. It was rare to see level 10 warriors, especially youths who had a natural advantage over others. Their future success would be unlimited. Frankly speaking, Aragon did not put the two men in his eyes at the start. Although they saved his and Serena's life, apart from being grateful, they were also filled with admiration. The only thing that could cause adventurers to have respect for someone was true ability. Intelligent people could tell that the scariest thing that happened in Black Hills Town was that crossbow. Aragon dared to bet with his life that there was huge, divine power within that weapon. Otherwise, it would not have passed through the skeletal wall and killed Thuzaden instantaneously. Apart from his outfit, it would be hard for Aragon to admire a level 5 warrior. However, it appeared that the two people did not simply only own a set of efficient equipment and good luck. "Oh, it's Aragon. Why are you here?" Seeing that it was someone familiar, Lin Li secretly dispersed the mana he'd gathered previously, and put on a smile on his face. Witnessing the battle between Sean and Sandro, Aragon's tone became extremely respectful towards Lin Li. He replied, "Leader Serena ordered us to run some errands. Then, we heard the sounds of fighting from the forest, and decided to take a look. Who knew it was you two? Hee, we met some trouble. But it's alright, we're settling it very soon." Mr. Fellick, could you let them stop their battle for a while?" Aragon seemed unsettled as he glanced at the fight in the distance. "What, you know that fella?" Lin Li asked as he observed Aragon's expression. He could guess what was in Aragon's mind. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.